What's up, guys? Welcome to Super Harry. We've got something special today. Fawkes burned 67 marriage contracts hidden in Dumbledore's vault, all binding Harry to Weasley's. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, Ash. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry had been awake since 4 in the morning, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he'd woken up not from a nightmare about Voldemort or a flash of green light behind his eyes, but from a sound, something like a distant chord struck on an instrument he didn't have a name for, resonant and clean and gone before he was fully conscious. He lay in the dark of Privet Drive's smallest bedroom for a long time afterward, staring at the ceiling, feeling strangely like something had shifted in the world's weight distribution and no one had told him yet. The letter came at 7, carried not by a ministry owl or a school owl or anything from the wizarding world he recognized. It came by a small, severe-looking hawk with slate-gray feathers and golden talons, and it landed on his windowsill with the composed dignity of a creature that had never once been late in its entire professional career. It deposited the letter, stared at him for exactly 3 seconds with what he could only describe as expectations, and left. The envelope was thick cream parchment with a seal he recognized immediately, the Gringotts crest, stamped in wax so dark it was almost black, embossed with the goblin script that ran along the bank's iron gates. He'd seen letters like this before, but always addressed to guardians or trustees. This one had his name on it in sharp, precise lettering. Harry James Potter. Heir apparent, Potter Estate. Notice of mandatory inheritance audit. He sat on the edge of his bed and read it twice. The language was formal and dense, the kind of legal magical prose that seemed specifically engineered to communicate urgency while sounding like someone was reading from a very old and very bored textbook. But the substance was clear enough. Phoenix flame activity had been detected within a private vault registered under his magical signature. An audit had been automatically triggered under Clause 7 of the Gringotts Magical Property Accord of 1347. His presence was required at the bank at his earliest convenience, where earliest convenience, the letter made pointedly clear, meant today. Harry read the line about Phoenix flame activity again. He thought about the sound that had woken him up at 4 in the morning. Then he got dressed, wrote a note for the Dursleys that they wouldn't read, and left. He took the night bus because it was the fastest option and because, at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, he didn't particularly care about being spotted. Stan Shonpike was not on shift, which was a mercy. The driver barely looked at him, took his sickles, and deposited him outside the Leaky Cauldron 40 minutes later with only one near-collision incident involving a herd of enchanted lawn ornaments somewhere outside Bristol. Diagon Alley was quiet at this hour. Shops still shuttered, the cobblestones gleaming from overnight rain, a few witches and wizards moving purposefully toward the early opening establishments. Harry walked through it without stopping, hands in his pockets, the Gringotts letter tucked inside his jacket. He kept his pace steady. He wasn't sure what he was walking toward yet, but he knew that the stone feeling in his stomach wasn't dread. It was closer to the moment before a Quidditch match when he could see the pitch clearly and knew exactly where the snitch was going to be. The goblins at the main entrance to Gringotts gave him a long, measuring look. Not the usual barely concealed indifference. This was something else, attentive, almost respectful, which from goblins meant something completely different than it would from anyone else. It meant they were watching him carefully and hadn't decided yet what he was worth. Harry Potter, he said to the nearest one. I received an audit notice. We know who you are, the goblin said, in a tone that made Mr. Potter sound like an afterthought they hadn't bothered with. Senior Arbiter Ragnarok has been expecting you. Follow Griphook. A second goblin had materialized at his elbow without any ceremony of approach. Griphook, and Harry recognized the name distantly, from his first visit here at 11 years old, gestured sharply toward the left corridor, the one that didn't lead to the usual vault carts. Harry followed. The corridor went deeper into the bank than Harry had ever been. The marble and gilded surfaces of the public entrance gave way to older stone, dark granite that had the quality of weight and age to it, carved with goblin script that wound along the walls in continuous lines. Torches burned in brackets, the flames the wrong shade of orange to be entirely mundane. The air was cooler here, and still, and it carried the particular atmosphere of a place that took record-keeping very seriously. Griphook stopped before a set of iron doors inlaid with interlocking circular patterns, knocked twice in a specific rhythm, and stepped aside. "Senior Arbiter Ragnak," he said, and left without another word. The room beyond the iron doors was not what Harry expected. He'd expected something like an office, a desk, ledgers, the bureaucratic furniture of official unpleasantness. What he found instead was closer to a library, if libraries were built to last through geological events. Shelves covered every wall from floor to a ceiling that was higher than it had any right to be, filled not with books but with flat ceramic tablets and rolled scrolls sealed in translucent cases and a dozen other archival formats he couldn't identify. The room smelled of very old parchment and something metallic that might have been magic itself. Ragnak was standing at the central table, which was large, dark-wooded, and covered with organized materials. He was old, older than any goblin Harry had encountered in the public areas of the bank, with the kind of face that had moved past the territory of simply aged into something that looked geological. His eyes were sharp and amber-colored, and they fixed on Harry with the same measuring attention he'd gotten at the entrance, except sharper. "Sit," Ragnak said. Not rudely. Just with the efficiency of someone for whom social formalities were a conscious choice rather than a default. Harry sat. "You know why you're here." "Phoenix fire in a vault," Harry said. "One registered to my magical signature." "Registered under your magical signature," Ragnak corrected, with the precision of someone who found the distinction important. "There is a difference. The vault itself was opened and maintained by another party. Your magical name was used as the anchor, the registration key, in layman's terms. This is not an arrangement you consented to, and more relevantly, it is not an arrangement Gringotts was informed of. The Phoenix Flame bypassed our wards entirely, which has not happened in this institution in 412 years, and triggered the Accord audit automatically." He paused. "We are not pleased about the bypassing of our wards." "I imagine not," Harry said. "What we are," Ragnak continued, settling into the chair across from him with deliberate care, "is thorough. The audit is complete. The contents of the vault at the time of the fire event were catalogued by the flame itself. Phoenix fire of sufficient age and intelligence leaves ash records. Traceable. Permanent. The records have been transferred here." He gestured to the materials laid out on the table. "You are entitled to review them. As the registered magical anchor, everything in that vault was, in the eyes of Gringotts law, done in your name." Harry looked at the table. There were ash records, he understood this now, looking at them, thin sheets of something like compressed gray material, covered in writing that had the quality of having been burned rather than inscribed, the letters dark and absolute against the pale gray surface. "Whose vault was it?" Harry asked. Ragnak looked at him for a moment. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." The stone feeling in Harry's stomach solidified. "What was burned?" Ragnak slid the first ash record across the table. Harry read it in silence. It was a marriage contract. The language was archaic in the way of things that had been adapted from older templates, formal Latin phrases interspersed with English, the terms laid out with the precise, bloodless vocabulary of a legal instrument. Herein the party of the first part, Harry James Potter, heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, is contracted in betrothal to. His eyes moved to the second party's name. Ginevra Molly Weasley. He read the entire thing without expression. The terms. The date of intended fulfillment. The magical enforcement clauses, 7 of them, layered in, describing what would happen to the magic of both parties if the contract remained unsigned past the fulfillment date, and what would happen if either party attempted to form a serious romantic attachment elsewhere before it was either fulfilled or formally voided by all signing parties. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Albus Dumbledore, as acting magical guardian, and Molly Weasley née Pruitt, as guardian of the second party. Harry's own name was not on it. He set it down. Slid it to the side. Ragnak was watching him with that amber gaze and saying nothing, which Harry was beginning to understand was a form of professional respect. He wasn't being managed right now. He was being given information and the space to receive it. He picked up the second Ash record. A different Weasley. The same structure. Dumbledore's signature at the bottom. Molly Weasley's signature at the bottom. Harry's name in the body of the contract as party of the first part, listed without his knowledge or consent. Third record. Fourth. He worked through them methodically, which surprised him a little, the methodical part. He'd always assumed that if something like this happened, if he found out he'd been systematically lied to by people he trusted, he'd lose his temper spectacularly. Shout. Break something. The anger was there, absolutely, it sat in his chest like a coal that had gone past burning into something cooler and more concentrated. But it didn't push outward. It pulled inward, organizing itself, becoming something he could actually use. 30 minutes later, he was on Ash record 34. An hour after that, he set down the 67th. He placed his hands flat on the table, on either side of the stack of Ash records, and looked at the pile. The contract spanned 17 years. The earliest was dated before he'd even started Hogwarts. He'd been 10 years old, still living in a cupboard under the stairs, and somewhere in London, Albus Dumbledore had been signing his name to a marriage contract on his behalf. Several covered Ginny directly, with different fulfillment timelines and varying enforcement clauses, as though Dumbledore had been hedging his bets on which terms would take. Others covered female cousins of the Weasleys Harry had never met, third and fourth generations, seemingly designed to ensure that no matter what happened with the primary contracts, Harry Potter would end up legally, magically, and permanently connected to the Weasley family. The most recent one was dated 8 months ago. Harry looked at Ragnarok. All 67, he said. All 67, Ragnarok confirmed. The Phoenix fire burned every contract individually. The Ash records were produced from the fire itself, which means they are immutable evidence under both Goblin and Wizarding law. Each contract is confirmed to have existed. Each is confirmed to have been stored in Dumbledore's private vault. Each is confirmed to have been destroyed by Phoenix fire. He paused. There are several things Gringotts finds notable. The first is that your magical name was used as the registration key for a vault you did not know existed, which constitutes a significant violation of our protocols. The second is that 17 of these contracts contain what we classify as proximity magic, enchantments designed to create emotional predisposition in the parties named. Specifically, in you. Harry's hands, still flat on the table, pressed slightly harder against the wood. Say that again. 17 contracts included secondary enchantments intended to make you emotionally predisposed toward the Weasley family in general and specific members in particular. Not a love potion, subtler than that. A cumulative magical nudge, built into the contract's enforcement architecture, designed to activate through proximity. The more time you spent with the contracted parties, the stronger it became. Ragnarok's voice remained completely level. He was not delivering this information cruelly. He was delivering it the way a surgeon describes a wound, with precision, because precision is what the situation requires. This is not unprecedented in the history of arranged betrothals. It is, however, illegal under current Wizarding law. Harry said nothing for a long time. Outside the iron doors, he could hear the distant sounds of the bank operating, the rumble of carts on the lower tracks, the muffled clatter of business being conducted. Normal things. The world going on. What are my options? He asked finally. Ragnarok straightened slightly. Legally, formally, you have a significant number of them. Under Gringotts law, which supersedes Wizarding law in matters pertaining to vault contents and magical registrations, you have the right to claim full independence from any and all contracts regardless of whether you have reached Wizarding majority. You are the aggrieved party under 7 separate clauses of the Accord. Additionally, as the surviving heir of James Harold Potter, you are entitled to have the full Potter estate audit conducted and all associated properties and assets returned to your direct control. He folded his hands on the table. Gringotts has a vested interest in this matter being resolved publicly and correctly. The violation of our wards, even by a phoenix, sets a precedent we are not willing to allow to stand unchallenged. We will support your claim. You want to make an example, Harry said. We want the integrity of Gringotts to be unambiguous, Ragnox said. These interests happen to align with yours. Harry looked at the stack of ash records again. 67 pieces of evidence. 67 years of being positioned, aimed, and wound up like a clock that was supposed to strike at the exact right moment and then be put quietly away. He thought about every meal at the Burrow. Every Christmas. Every time Molly Weasley had put her arms around him and called him like family. He didn't want to think about whether he'd felt things because they were real or because 17 of these contracts had been engineering him to feel them. He thought about Fawkes. The Phoenix hadn't been seen since Dumbledore's magical signature had begun to weaken in the wake of the Triwizard Tournament events. He'd been around less often, quieter, as though sensing something in his bonded wizard that troubled him. But Harry had always assumed Fawkes was simply loyal, ancient bird, ancient bond, would stand by Dumbledore regardless. It had never occurred to him that Fawkes might have a moral code that was entirely his own. That a creature old enough to have been burning and reborning since before the founding of Hogwarts might look at what was in that vault and decide, independently and decisively, that it needed to end. The sound that had woken him at 4 this morning. A chord. A resonant, clean, final thing. That was the moment the contracts burned. Fawkes had wanted him to know. Had triggered the audit deliberately, knowing exactly what it would do, knowing that when the ash records transferred to Gringotts archives Harry would be summoned here to read them. An ancient creature who had decided, without being asked, that Harry Potter deserved the truth. I want everything, Harry said. He heard his own voice and noted, with something like detachment, that it was very steady. The full estate audit. The Independence Declaration. The ash records preserved under Gringotts' seal. He met Ragnox's amber eyes. And I want to know everything you know about who signed these contracts, in what capacity, and whether any of them had ministry involvement. Ragnox looked at him for a moment. Then he reached beneath the table and produced a second, thicker folder. We anticipated this question, he said. We began our own preliminary review this morning. He opened it and placed the first document in front of Harry. The most recent contract, Ragnox said. Signed 8 months ago. Dumbledore's signature is there, as usual. But there is a second signatory, not Molly Weasley this time. A co-signatory with minister-registered magical credentials. He pointed to the signature at the bottom of the record. Harry read the name. He read it twice, the way he'd read the original audit letter, not because he hadn't understood it the first time, but because he was making sure it was real. The name was attached to a ministry seal. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This one wasn't just about the greater good, Ragnox said quietly. Someone at the ministry wanted this contract to stick. Harry closed the folder. He sat back in his chair, and for the first time that morning, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of all 67 of those contracts sitting in a pile in front of him, burned to ash by a creature who had made a choice, alone, in the dark, before sunrise on a Tuesday in July, to give Harry Potter back something he'd never known had been taken. The anger was still there, still cold, dense and concentrated. But above it, or maybe around it, was something else. Something lighter and more dangerous than anger. Clarity. I'll need those records certified, he said. Every one. Under Gringotts' seal. I'll need the estate audit scheduled for the end of this week at the latest. I'll need a formal letter from Gringotts confirming my status as aggrieved party under the accord. He paused. And I'll need the name of a wizarding solicitor. One who isn't connected to Dumbledore, the Order, or the Ministry. We have 3 recommendations, Ragnox said. He almost sounded satisfied. The best of them is a witch named Castellan. She ran the Buckbeak extradition appeal process before Fudge shut it down. She is not fond of people who use legal instruments to circumvent inconvenient facts. Get her a message, Harry said. Tell her I'll be in contact today. He stood, and something about the way he did it, the absence of hesitation, the complete lack of the hunched shoulder, head-down quality that had characterized most of his public movements since he was 11, made Ragnarok look up at him with that amber gaze again. Mr. Potter, the goblin said. I want to be clear about something. Gringotts' support in this matter is institutional and motivated by our own interests. But I will tell you personally, as senior arbiter, that I have reviewed a significant number of vault contents in the course of my career, and I have never encountered a collection of documents as thoroughly contemptuous of another person's existence as what was in that vault. He closed his own folder. It was good that the Phoenix burned them. Harry looked at him. Yeah, he said. It was. He picked up the certified copies of the Ash records. Ragnarok had prepared them already, efficient as everything else in this room, tucked them inside his jacket alongside the original letter, and walked toward the iron doors. One more thing, Ragnarok said. Harry turned. The vault registration under your magical name, the one used by Dumbledore without your consent, it has been flagged and frozen pending your formal independence declaration. Until that declaration is filed, no one can access or create any magical instrument using your name as a legal anchor. That protection became active the moment the Phoenix fire was registered this morning. Harry thought about that. The fire had done more than burn the contracts. It had sealed the door behind them. Fawkes thought of everything, he said. Phoenixes are very old, Ragnarok said, and there was something in his voice that might, from a goblin, have been wonder. They remember things we have forgotten were worth remembering. Harry pushed open the iron doors and walked out into the torchlit corridor, with 67 Ash records against his chest and the name of a ministry official burning in his memory, and made his way back through the deep tunnels of Gringotts toward the pale morning light of Diagon Alley. He didn't walk slowly. He didn't walk with his head down. He didn't look like a boy who had just found out that the people he loved most had been engineering him since before he could read. He looked, if anyone had been paying attention, like someone who had just been handed a map after spending years wandering in a forest, and who had immediately identified exactly where he was and exactly where he was going. Outside, the alley was waking up. A few more shops opening, the smell of the bakery that opened early near Flourish and Blots drifting across the cobblestones, an old witch arguing with a Owl Post employee about a misdelivered parcel. Normal Tuesday morning. Life going on with magnificent indifference to the fact that everything had just changed. Harry stood on the steps of Gringotts for a moment, feeling the July air on his face, and took stock. He had 67 Ash records. He had Gringotts' institutional backing. He had a solicitor's name. He had the name on the most recent contract burning in his memory like a brand. He had the knowledge that for years, his entire life, essentially, someone had been arranging the furniture of his existence with enormous care and the absolute assumption that Harry Potter would never look up from his assigned path long enough to notice the room he was standing in. He also had, for the first time, the full and complete understanding that none of that was going to continue. He had a lot to do. He pulled out a scrap of parchment, the back of an old homework assignment, he thought, something about the properties of Riem blood that he'd shoved in his jacket pocket last term, and began writing a list. Not a dramatic list. Not a manifesto. Just the practical, sequential actions of someone who was going to take his life apart from the framework of other people's making and rebuild it according to his own specifications. First, find somewhere to stay that wasn't Privet Drive and wasn't the Burrow and wasn't anywhere the Order of the Phoenix considered a safe house. Second, contact Castellan the solicitor. Third, have the full Potter estate audit done before anyone realized what was coming. Fourth, figure out what to do about Dumbledore. He paused on that last one. He stared at it. Then he added a fifth item, because it had been nagging at him since Ragnarok laid the final contract in front of him. Fifth, find out if Ginny knew. He folded the list, tucked it away, and started walking. Not toward the night bus stop. Toward the far end of Diagon Alley, where a small, unremarkable door led into the network of wizarding streets and side routes that the general tourist population of the alley never found. He'd learned about it from Fred and George 2 summers ago, in the course of one of their supply-gathering expeditions for the joke shop. It connected to a network of magical post offices, small merchant houses, and service establishments that catered to old wizarding families with old wizarding habits, the kind who didn't like to do their business where everyone could see. He found the door without difficulty, pushed it open, and stepped into a narrow, cobbled passage between buildings. A small sign on the wall listed the establishments accessible from this route, and about halfway down the list he found what he was looking for: Castellan and Associates, Magical Property and Contract Law, EST 1987. He knocked. The door opened within seconds, as though the establishment had been expecting someone to knock at 9 in the morning and was professionally prepared to receive them. A young witch with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of organized efficiency looked at him. "Harry Potter," she said. Not a question. She'd clearly received Ragnarok's message faster than Harry had covered the distance between Gringotts and here, hawk messengers, probably, or some goblin equivalent. "Ms. Castellan will see you now." He stepped inside. The office was small, practical, and aggressively tidy, with the specific organization of a workspace where serious work actually happened. The solicitor herself looked up from behind a desk covered in organized folders and immediately stood. She was perhaps 45, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and the kind of eyes that catalogued everything they looked at. She wore her robes like business armor. "Sit," she said, and Harry noted, with something like dark amusement, that this was the second time this morning a person of consequence had greeted him with that word and none of the usual hedging. He was finding he preferred it. Ragnarok's message was thorough. "I've already pulled the relevant statutes. Before we begin, I need you to understand my fee structure, which is substantial, and my working conditions, which are non-negotiable." "What are your working conditions?" Harry asked. "I don't lose," she said. "Which means I don't take cases I'm not going to win, and it means that when I tell you to do something, you do it within the timeframe I specify. I've read enough about you to know that independent initiative is something you're prone to. That's fine in principle. In practice, it means you run things by me before you do them. Are we clear?" Harry looked at her. She looked back, entirely unimpressed with being across the table from the boy who lived, which was immediately one of the most refreshing things that had happened to him all morning. "Clear," he said. "Good." She sat back down, opened a folder, and picked up a quick quotes quill. "Tell me everything. Start from when you received the Gringotts letter this morning and don't leave anything out. I'll tell you what's relevant." So Harry told her. All of it. The Ash records, Ragnarok's findings, the proximity magic in 17 of the contracts, the ministry co-signatory on the most recent one. He spoke clearly, without editorializing, laying out the facts in the order they'd been presented to him. Castellan listened without interrupting, the quill moving in steady shorthand across her notes, her expression shifting occasionally with the quality of a person recalculating damage estimates. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The ministry co-signatory is the most pressing problem," she said. "Dumbledore acting as magical guardian without formal appointment is irregular and defensible from a legally grey position. The courts have upheld informal magical guardian arrangements before. But a ministry official co-signing a marriage contract for a minor using minister-registered credentials?" She shook her head. "That is not legally grey. That is a Category 5 violation of the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1978. Criminal, not civil. So it can be prosecuted. It will need to be handled carefully. The ministry doesn't love prosecuting its own people, especially when that person has, I'm going to guess, some degree of political protection." She looked at him over her papers. "I'm going to need to know the name on that contract." Harry told her. The quill stopped moving. Castellan looked at him for a full 3 seconds without writing anything, which was, he was beginning to understand, a significant departure from her normal mode of operation. "Well," she said. "That does explain some things." "Does it?" "It explains why those contracts survived as long as they did without anyone filing an audit challenge. That particular individual has been in a position to intercept or redirect any magical flag that might have been triggered by the contract architecture. She began writing again, faster now. It also means that your independence declaration needs to go through Gringotts rather than the ministry, because if it goes through the ministry there's a very real chance it gets buried before it can be formally registered. Ragnak will know this already. I'd expect he's already drafted the paperwork. She looked up. He likes you, incidentally. For a goblin, that's practically a formal endorsement. He said Gringotts has a vested interest. He always says that. It doesn't mean the personal element isn't there. She closed her folder with a decisive snap. Here is what we're going to do. Today, Gringotts files the Independence Declaration and the estate audit request simultaneously. You do not contact Dumbledore, the Weasleys, or anyone connected to the Order until I tell you to. You need somewhere to stay, somewhere that has its own magical protections and is not under a Fidelius or Order ward, because those can be used to restrict your movement if someone decides to reframe this as a safety situation. I have somewhere in mind, Harry said. Grimmauld Place had been sitting in the back of his head since Ragnak had said the words full estate audit. Sirius had left it to him. The will had never been executed, but with the estate audit running, everything Sirius had owned would have to be formally transferred, and Grimmauld Place was part of that. Tell me. 12 Grimmauld Place. Sirius Black's estate. Castellan nodded slowly. The Black estate execution has been pending since his death, yes. The executor's seal has been held by, she stopped. Dumbledore. He holds the executor's seal. She looked at Harry with the expression of someone doing rapid mental recalculations. Which means he's been preventing Sirius's will from being executed. Which means you've been legally homeless in wizarding terms since last summer, because the property that was intended to pass to you hasn't passed. Which means we have more than 67 contracts to add to the claim. Harry sat with that for a moment. Sirius had left him everything, and for a year, Harry hadn't been able to claim any of it, because Dumbledore was holding the one document that would make the transfer legal. He hadn't known. He'd had no reason to look. How long has this been going on? The question didn't make him spiral. He turned it over, examined it, set it aside. The specific timeline would emerge through the audit. What mattered right now was the next hour, and the next day, and the legal architecture that was going to make all of this stick. Can you get the executor's seal transferred without his cooperation? Harry asked. Under the Gringotts estate audit, the executor's seal becomes the bank's jurisdiction if the executor has failed to act within a reasonable period. A year is significantly beyond reasonable. She was writing again. Yes. I can get it transferred by end of day today if Ragnak moves on it this afternoon. She finished writing, set her quill down, and looked at him with the clear-eyed directness that he was already beginning to appreciate as her defining characteristic. Mr. Potter. I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. All right. Are you prepared for what this is going to do? Not to Dumbledore, to the people around him. The Weasleys. Your friends. The Order members who weren't involved in the contracts but who benefit from the architecture that produced them. When this becomes public, and it will become public, the story isn't going to be tidy. Some people who love you did things they convinced themselves were for your protection. They were wrong, and some of them were criminally wrong, but the emotional reality is complicated, and you're going to be standing at the center of a very complicated storm. Harry thought about the Weasley family. George pulling him into headlocks. Fred making him laugh during the worst moments of last year. Arthur Weasley's genuine delight at Muggle objects. Even Ron, exasperating Ron, who'd been his first friend, who'd stood next to him through things that would have broken most people. He thought about all of it, and he held it clearly in his mind, and he didn't minimize any of it. Then he thought about 67 contracts. He thought about proximity magic running in the background of his friendships like a current he'd never been able to feel directly. He thought about Sirius's will sitting in a drawer in Dumbledore's office for a year while Harry slept in a cupboard under the stairs in his memory. He thought about Ragnar's voice saying, "It was good that the phoenix burned them." "Yes," he said. "I'm prepared." Castellan studied him for one more moment. Then she nodded, once, and picked up a new sheet of parchment. "Then let's get to work," she said. By early afternoon, the estate audit was filed. By mid-afternoon, the executor's seal transfer was in motion, Ragnar having received Castellan's communication and moved with the decisive speed of a goblin institution that had been looking for exactly this opportunity. By 4 o'clock, Harry had a formal letter from Gringotts confirming his status as aggrieved party under 5 separate clauses of the accord. The Independence Declaration was drafted and pending his signature, and Castellan had identified 3 additional areas of potential claim that even Harry hadn't thought to ask about. Harry signed the Independence Declaration at 4:15, sitting at Castellan's desk with the late afternoon sun coming through the narrow window at an angle that caught the dust motes in the air and made them look like tiny suspended stars. It was a strange moment to have, the quiet procedural act of signing his name to a document that said, in the unambiguous language of goblin-supervised wizarding law, that Harry James Potter was a legally independent magical individual, responsible for himself, beholden to no guardian, no contractor, and no trustee. He put the quill down and looked at his signature. Then he put the thought away and focused on the next item on the list. He sent a message to Grimmauld Place, to Creature, specifically, because whatever his other qualities, the house elf was unambiguously bound to the Black Estate and would not be reporting to anyone else. The message was brief: he was coming tonight, the house was to be made habitable, no one was to be admitted until further notice. The response came back within the hour, delivered by a small, unremarkable envelope that appeared on Castellan's desk with no carrier, house elf magic, barely legible, but containing the essential information that Creature had received the message, that the house was capable of being made habitable, and that the house elf seemed to consider Harry's impending arrival something between a duty and a grudging acknowledgement of inheritance. Good enough. He collected his certified Ash records, his copies of all the filed documents, and the formal Gringotts letter, organized them carefully in the document case Castellan had provided, and stood. "Tomorrow morning," Castellan said. 8 sharp. Ragnar will have the estate transfer documents ready and I'll have the formal nullification petition drafted for the contracts. We'll review together before filing. I'll be here, Harry said. He left the office and stepped back into the narrow passage. The late afternoon sun was golden now, slanting between the buildings, and Diagon Alley's sounds drifted over the rooftops, the normal sounds of commerce and community, everything going on. He stood in the passage for a moment, his document case in his hand, and thought about everything that had happened since 7 in the morning when a stern hawk had dropped a letter on his windowsill. 16 hours ago, he'd been staring at the ceiling of Privet Drive. He thought about Fawkes. He didn't know where the Phoenix was now, whether it had gone somewhere, whether Phoenixes had places they went to when they weren't bonded to anyone. He hoped it was somewhere good. He hoped the bird was all right. He was aware this was a slightly absurd thing to hope about a creature that literally could not die, but he hoped it anyway. Thank you, he thought, in the direction of wherever ancient firebirds went when they chose themselves. Then he straightened his jacket, tucked the document case under his arm, and walked back out into the alley, toward the late light of a July afternoon that belonged, for the first time in his life, entirely to him. He had one more thing to do before nightfall. He pulled out the list from his jacket and looked at item 4. Figure out what to do about Dumbledore. He put the list away without crossing it off. That one needed more thought. Not because he was afraid of it, he wasn't. He just wanted to do it right. He wanted to understand, before that conversation happened, the full shape of what had been done, so that when he stood across from Albus Dumbledore and the old man looked at him with those half-moon glasses and that carefully measured expression of wise and weary regret, Harry would not be a student in a headmaster's office. He would be himself, fully and finally, and he would know exactly what to say. That conversation was coming. Sooner than Dumbledore expected, probably. Certainly sooner than anyone in the Order was going to be prepared for. But first, tonight, Grimmauld Place. A room that was his. A moment to sit with the ash records and the quiet and let the weight of the day settle into something he could carry. He flagged the night bus. It arrived with its usual catastrophic lurch. Stan Shonpike was still off shift, and Harry climbed on with his document case and his list of things to do and 67 pieces of evidence that were going to change everything. The bus lurched forward into traffic. Harry sat in the back, completely still, watching the city go by, and thought about nothing in particular for the first time all day. Chapter 2, The weight of Key's grim old place at night was a different creature than it was by day. By day, it was oppressive, the dark wallpaper, the mounted heads, the portrait of Walburga Black with its curtains drawn, the general atmosphere of a house that had spent decades being unhappy and had gotten very good at communicating this. By night, it was something else. The shadows deepened into something almost absolute, and the house made sounds that had nothing to do with pipes or settling foundations, quiet, deliberate sounds, like a very old thing breathing slowly and choosing whether to acknowledge you. Harry arrived just past 8, stepping through the front door with the key Ragnarok had arranged to have transferred that afternoon, a heavy, iron thing with black family crests worked into the bow, nothing subtle about it, exactly the kind of key that wanted you to know it was significant. The door opened before he'd finished turning it, which he attributed to house magic and not to Creature, because he could hear Creature in the kitchen doing something aggressively domestic with what sounded like an entire set of copper pots. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment. The last time he'd been here, it had been full of order members, voices from downstairs, cloaks hung on the rack, the smell of Mrs. Weasley's cooking drifting up from the kitchen, and the constant low-grade tension of a safe house operating at capacity. Now it was empty and still, and it was his. Not a safe house. Not a headquarters. His. He walked through the ground floor slowly, not because he was uncertain about anything, but because he was taking stock. Walburga's portrait was behind its curtains, which held as long as no one yelled near it. The library, which had made Hermione's eyes go enormous the first time she'd seen it, was intact, its shelves of dark and occasionally alarming texts undisturbed. The drawing room still had the display case of dark artifacts that no one had ever managed to fully clear out. He made a mental note about that one. Creature appeared at the kitchen doorway, looking at Harry with the specific expression of a house elf who had complicated feelings and was managing them through the aggressive maintenance of property. "Master Harry," the elf said, in a voice like gravel being dragged over old wood. "Creature," Harry said. "The house looks better." It did, marginally. Creature had been busy, the worst of the dust was gone, the floors were less actively grimy, and the general miasma of organized neglect had been pushed back to something closer to ordinary old house staleness. It was a start. "Master Sirius's room has been prepared," Creature said. He paused, and something moved in his large eyes that Harry didn't try to analyze too deeply. "It is the best room." "Thank you," Harry said. Creature stared at him for another moment, then retreated into the kitchen. Harry heard the sound of something being put on the stove with more care than was strictly necessary. He went upstairs to Sirius's room. It was the best room. Creature hadn't been exaggerating. It faced the back of the house, away from the street, and it was large enough to feel like a space rather than just a container. Sirius had stripped most of the Black family decor from it years ago. There were marks on the walls where things had been taken down, small pale rectangles in the dark wallpaper, and replaced it with the carefully maintained chaos of someone who'd had very strong aesthetic opinions. Motorbike diagrams tucked behind the mirror frame. A set of Gryffindor Quidditch rosters from the 1970s pinned to the inside of the wardrobe door. Books stacked on every flat surface with the system of someone who knew exactly where everything was and didn't need it to make sense to anyone else. Harry set his document case on the desk, sat on the edge of the bed, and let himself breathe for a moment. The day had been, a lot. He wasn't going to perform not feeling it just because he'd kept his composure through the actual events of it. The composure was real, but it was made of focus, and focus required something underneath it. He sat with the underneath part for a while. The specific quality of what it felt like to read 67 contracts with your name on them, contracts that had been written and signed and stored away while you were living in a cupboard and knowing nothing about any of it. He thought about Sirius. Specifically about the fact that Sirius had known about the contracts, almost certainly. Sirius had been inside the Order, had known Dumbledore's methods, and had been conspicuously enthusiastic about Harry living his own life, making his own choices, not letting anyone else write his story. All those conversations they'd had, last year and the year before. You're not your father, Harry, but you're not nothing either. Don't let them make you small. Had Sirius known what Dumbledore had in that vault and been fighting it the only way he could from inside the Order's structure? Harry turned that over. He thought it was possible. He thought Sirius had been, in his way, trying to counterbalance something he couldn't directly confront. It didn't make everything fine, but it made Sirius's specific brand of fierce, angry affection make a different kind of sense. He pulled the document case onto the desk, opened it, and spread out the Ash records methodically. Not all 67, he'd memorized the key details from all of those. Just the ones that had specific anomalies. The ones with proximity magic built in. The most recent one with the Ministry co-signatory. He looked at that last one for a long time. Then he put everything away, changed into clothes that weren't travel dusty, went downstairs, and ate the food Creature had left on the stove without being asked, a decent lamb stew that suggested Creature's feelings about serving the new master of the house were more favorable than he was going to acknowledge directly, and went to bed. He slept without dreams, which was new. By 9 the next morning he was back in Castellan's office with Ragnarok present as well, the three of them arranged around the solicitor's desk with coffee that Castellan's assistant had brought and that Ragnarok regarded with the polite blankness of someone who considered the entire concept of beverages unnecessary to the business at hand. The estate transfer documents were everything Ragnarok had promised, comprehensive, legally airtight, and moving at goblin speed, which meant they had already been formally submitted to the 3 regulatory bodies that needed to register them before they became effective. The executor's seal had been transferred from Dumbledore to Gringotts acting as neutral executor, which was a procedural mechanism that apparently existed precisely for situations where an appointed executor had failed to act in a timely fashion. It will be formally registered by end of business today, Ragnarok said. At that point, the Black Estate, all properties, liquid assets, and holdings, transfers to your direct control. Grimmauld Place, the Black Family Vault, and several smaller properties in Scotland and the continent. What about the Order's access to Grimmauld Place? Harry asked. They've been using it as their headquarters. A property under Order of the Phoenix occupation that has just transferred to a new owner, Castellan said, with the tone of someone reciting something they find professionally satisfying. They have no legal basis for continued occupation without your explicit permission. The Fidelius charm on the property is interesting. Technically, with you as owner and the original secret keeper deceased, the secret is distributed among those who knew it, but the property protections themselves are now under your authority. You can reinforce them, change them, or revoke them. I'm not going to lock them out tonight, Harry said. He'd thought about this on the walk over. They need time to relocate. But I want it clear that it's my decision, that they're there because I'm allowing it, not because they have a claim. He paused. And I want to be able to revoke that permission specifically, individually, if I need to. Ragnarok made a note. We can draft the permission structure to allow for that. Good. Harry wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. What about the nullification petition for the contracts? Castellan produced a document that was longer and considerably more complicated than Harry had expected. This is the formal petition to the Wisengamot for nullification of all 67 contracts. I've framed it under the Magical Persons Protection Act. The proximity magic elements specifically constitute a criminal violation, which means this isn't purely a civil filing. It has to go to the Wisengamot rather than just the contract courts. She turned to a flagged page. Here is where it gets interesting. Because the most recent contract has a ministry co-signatory, that individual can be named as a respondent in the criminal filing. That changes the political weight of this considerably. It stops being Dumbledore used some grey legal maneuvering and becomes a ministry official participated in the illegal magical manipulation of a minor. Do it, Harry said. I want to be certain you understand what that triggers, Castellan said, not second-guessing him, just being thorough. The moment this petition is filed, it becomes a matter of public record. The Wiesengemott's docket is not sealed. People will know. People should know, Harry said. Castellan looked at him for a moment, then wrote something in her notes. All right. I'll file this afternoon. Ragnock produced his own folder. There is one additional element we identified this morning. The proximity magic in the 17 contracts. We had our Cursebreaker team review the technical architecture overnight. The enchantments were not designed to operate only through proximity to the Weasley family. They were designed to dampen your independent relational instincts more broadly. Meaning that your general tendency to form close bonds outside the designated social circle was being actively suppressed. Harry set down his coffee cup. You're saying it wasn't just making me like the Weasleys. It was making me less likely to genuinely connect with anyone else. Correctly stated. Ragnock's voice was completely neutral. The mechanism was subtle. It would not have produced obvious emotional distortions. But over years of exposure, the cumulative effect would be a person who found it slightly harder to trust, slightly more suspicious of new connections, slightly more inclined to retreat to the familiar social architecture. He paused. We cannot say with certainty how much of your social history was influenced by this. We can say that the mechanism existed and was functioning. Harry looked at the table. He thought about fifth year. About how closed off he'd been, how the only people he'd trusted were the ones he'd known longest, how every attempt to build something new had felt like wading through something thick and resistant. He'd put that down to trauma, to Voldemort, to the weight of everything. Some of it had been that. But some of it, some percentage of that isolation, that difficulty, had been engineered. Built into him like a wall he didn't know was there. The cold dense anger in his chest burned a degree hotter. Is it still operating? He asked. The contracts that contained those enchantments were the ones burned by the Phoenix, Ragnock said. The Ash records confirm they are destroyed. The enchantment architecture would have required the physical contracts to function. Once burned, the mechanism collapsed. He met Harry's eyes. Whatever you feel now is yours. Whatever you feel now is yours. Harry picked his coffee back up, took a drink, and looked at the petition document. Let's go through the filing structure, he said. I want to understand every element before it goes in. They spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that. The owl arrived at Grimmauld Place just after noon, while Harry was at the kitchen table with Creature making tea and going through the Black family vault inventory that Ragnock had sent over. He'd been expecting owls. He'd expected Rons to come first, actually, because Rons were always first in the family, the one who checked in, the one who kept the channels open. But the first owl was Hermione's, identifiable by the anxious efficiency with which her tawny owl landed and extended its leg. He read the letter. Harry, I just heard from Ron that you didn't come back to the Burrow after your Gringotts letter. He says Mrs. Weasley is worried. I told him you probably just needed some time on your own and not to fuss, but I'll admit I'm curious about what the letter was about. Gringotts doesn't usually send notices to students during the summer. Are you all right? Please write back. Hermione. He put it down and thought about how to reply to this. Hermione's letter was exactly what he'd have expected from her, practically worded, overtly not panicking, but with the undercurrent of someone who was keeping themselves from panicking by focusing on practical wording. She cared about him genuinely and without any of the engineering that had characterized other relationships. He was fairly certain of that. The proximity magic had been designed to bind him to the Weasley social circle, but Hermione was adjacent to that rather than part of it by blood, and her attachment to Harry had been formed through shared near-death experiences rather than curated proximity, which was considerably harder to fake. He wrote back. Short, honest, careful. Hermione, I'm fine. I'm staying at Grimmauld Place, it's properly mine now, the estate transfer went through today. The Gringotts letter was about something significant that I'll tell you about in person. Can you come tomorrow? Come alone, please. Don't mention it to Ron or Mrs. Weasley first. Harry. He sent it, went back to the vault inventory, and waited. Her reply came back in under an hour, which meant she'd been close to her owl. I'll be there at 10. I won't say anything. But Harry, significant, is very large territory and I'm going to need you to prepare me for, you know what, never mind. 10 o'clock. Don't be alarmed if I've done a lot of reading between now and then. He almost smiled. Ron's letter arrived 20 minutes later, and was exactly Ron, mate, where are you? Mum's going mad, she's convinced something happened. Fred and George keep telling her you're 16 and can handle yourself and she threatened to box their ears. Are you coming for the rest of the summer? Also George says the new product line is almost done if you wanted to come by the shop. Let us know. Ron. Harry read it twice. There was nothing suspicious in it. Nothing calculated. Ron was just Ron, concerned, casual about the concern, using Fred and George as emotional proxies to keep things light. And Harry had known Ron for 5 years and knew the texture of his letters and the specific way he phrased things, and this was Ron being genuine. But Ragnarok had said Ron didn't forge the contracts, but he knew something was off for years and chose not to ask questions. And Harry believed that, not because Ragnarok had said it, but because there had always been this quality to Ron's loyalty, a thickness to it, a don't ask, don't look quality that Harry had always attributed to Ron's personality, to his discomfort with complexity, to the way he processed things by moving past them rather than through them. Harry had never examined it too closely because Ron was his best friend and you didn't forensically analyze your best friend's loyalty. Except now he was. Because he had to. He wrote back. Ron, I'm at Grimmauld Place. Estate came through properly, it's mine now. I'm fine, just need some time to sort out some things. Tell your mum not to worry. I'll be in touch soon. Harry. He didn't say come over. He didn't say I'll be back at the Burrow soon. He sent it and put it out of his mind and went back to the vault inventory, which was more interesting than he'd expected. The Black family had been collecting things for centuries, and not all of it was dark, and some of it was genuinely extraordinary. The afternoon passed in the focused quiet of someone doing research with a specific purpose. He was building a picture. Not just of the contracts and their legal dimensions, but of the full architecture, who had known what, when, how decisions had been made and by whom. The Black family library was useful for this, because the Blacks had been at the center of pureblood wizarding politics for centuries and had kept obsessive records of their genealogical and political entanglements. Cross-referencing family trees with the names on the contracts told him several things, including that the Weasley family's position in the contracts was not an accident of sentiment but a specific strategic choice, a family with old blood, limited resources, complete loyalty to Dumbledore, and a daughter the right age. He was deep in a Black family correspondence archive from the 1980s when Kreacher appeared in the doorway with the specific posture of a house elf who had something to say and was working up to saying it. What is it, Kreacher? There is a wizard outside, Kreacher said. He has been standing on the pavement for 12 minutes. He has not knocked. Harry looked up. What does he look like? Old, Kreacher said. Very old. With a long beard and half-moon glasses, and he is looking at the house in the way that wizards look at things they used to own. Harry set down the correspondence he'd been reading. He was quiet for a moment. Don't let him in, he said. I'll go out. He stood, straightened his jacket, he'd gotten into the habit, he was noticing, of straightening his jacket when he was about to walk into something, a small physical settling, and went to the front door. Dumbledore was standing on the pavement in front of number 12, and he looked, Harry noted this with a clinical detachment, like a man who was choosing his expression very carefully. The robes were travel plain, not the usual extravagance of deep purple or rich blue. The half-moon glasses were in place. The silver beard was immaculate. He looked like Dumbledore always looked, ancient, kind, wise, and slightly sad in a way designed to communicate depth. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at him. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and careful. I wonder if I might come in. No, Harry said. A pause. The kind of pause that a person makes when they are recalibrating. I understand that you received a letter from Gringotts. I would like very much to explain. You can explain from there, Harry said. Or we can talk tomorrow through my solicitor's office, which will also be Ragnarok's office. Your choice. Another pause. Longer this time. Harry watched Dumbledore's face move through something that wasn't quite calculation but was adjacent to it, the specific expression of a very intelligent person who has walked into a situation expecting one kind of conversation and found a completely different architecture in place. You have a solicitor, Dumbledore said. Castellan. Yes. You've been busy. There was something in his voice that Harry might once have read as fondness, the headmaster's warm approval of a capable student. He was no longer reading it that way. I have been, Harry agreed. I also have the estate transfer documents for the Black property. The executor's seal was transferred to Gringotts this afternoon, which you've probably already received formal notification of. He watched Dumbledore's face. I thought it was interesting that you'd been holding it for a year. Dumbledore was quiet. Sirius left me everything, Harry said. That was his choice. You had the legal instrument that would have made it happen and you held it for a year. I'd like to know why. I was concerned about your safety, Dumbledore said. He was meeting Harry's gaze directly, no looking away, no evasion. He believed what he was saying, and that was the most complicated part. Grimmauld Place unprotected, accessible to you at any time, without the Order's oversight, my safety, Harry said. Right. He let that sit for a moment. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Dumbledore waited. Did you ever intend to tell me about the contracts? The silence that followed was its own answer. But Dumbledore spoke into it anyway. I intended, when the time was right, Harry repeated. Not mimicking. Not mocking. Just placing the phrase in the air where they could both look at it. When was the right time going to be? Before or after one of them came into effect? Dumbledore removed his glasses, polished them, a gesture Harry had seen hundreds of times, and which he now recognized as the headmaster buying himself 3 seconds to find the right words. Harry. What I did because I believed. I know what you believed, Harry said. I know you believed it was for the greater good. I know you believed that keeping me connected to the Weasley family, positioned within that social structure, bound by those contracts, you believed all of that was keeping me safe, keeping me focused, keeping me pointing in the right direction. He crossed his arms. He was not angry. He was very, very clear. What I want you to understand is that I was never a piece that needed to be kept pointing in the right direction. I was a person. And every contract you signed in my name was a decision you made to treat me as less than that. Dumbledore looked at him. In the blue evening light of the street, something moved across the old man's face that wasn't calculation or warmth or any of the usual registers. It was closer to recognition. The specific look of someone who has heard a true thing and knows it and cannot argue with it. Harry, he said quietly. You're right. Harry hadn't expected that. Not the concession itself, he'd expected Dumbledore to try to find a way to frame it as justified. He hadn't expected the directness. He watched the headmaster carefully for the shape of what came next. What I did was wrong, Dumbledore continued. He said it the way he said most things, with weight, with deliberation, as though the words themselves required careful handling. I convinced myself that the ends justified the measures I took. I told myself that you were too young to understand, that the world was too dangerous for you to navigate without support structures I could ensure. I told myself these things for many years and I did not look closely at what they were making me do. He paused. I cannot undo any of it. I can only tell you that I am sorry, and that my sorrow is not, I hope, only for the situation it has created. Harry looked at him for a long moment. There was something genuinely terrible about this, not in the way he'd anticipated, not in the straightforward way of confronting a villain, but in the way of confronting someone who was genuinely, comprehensively wrong in ways that had their roots in genuine, complicated care. Dumbledore had loved him. He was sure of that. Dumbledore had looked at the scarred infant survivor and the friendless boy in the cupboard and the damaged, fiercely loyal teenager, and had felt something real. And had let that real feeling coexist with an architecture of control so thorough that it reached into Harry's emotional life and tried to curate it. That was the worst part. Not the malice. The absence of malice. The possibility of love and manipulation existing in the same person at the same time, neither cancelling the other out. I appreciate you saying that, Harry said finally. But here's what's going to happen regardless. Castellan is filing the nullification petition tomorrow. All 67 contracts are going to be presented to the Wisengamot. The proximity magic elements are going to be a matter of public record. The ministry co-signatory on the most recent contract is going to be named as a respondent in a criminal filing. He let that land. I didn't come to you first because I wanted your blessing or your cooperation. I'm telling you now so that you're not surprised. Dumbledore was very still. The ministry co-signatory, he said. There was something new in his voice, a tightening, subtle but real. Harry, that particular element is more complicated than, I know it is, Harry said. That's why I have people handling it who know what they're doing. He uncrossed his arms. I'm not going to stand in the doorway all night. Was there anything else you needed to say? Dumbledore looked at him, and Harry saw it, the specific, honest grief of a man who was watching something he'd built, something he believed in, come apart at its foundations, and who understood that he had built it on the wrong material. He saw it and didn't flinch from it and didn't let it change anything. Only that I hope, Dumbledore said carefully, that this doesn't mean the end of everything between us. I remain, whatever my failings, someone who cares very deeply about you. I know you do, Harry said. That's what makes it complicated. He stepped back from the doorway slightly. Not closing the door, just a clear signal that the conversation was at its natural end. Good night, Professor. Dumbledore held his gaze for one more moment. Then he nodded, once, and turned, and walked down the street. Harry watched him until the old man rounded the corner and was gone. He closed the door. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment, back against the door, and let out a breath. Then he straightened up and went back to the kitchen. Kreacher was hovering near the stove with the expression of a house elf who had been listening through the door and was not sorry about it. Tea, Harry said. Kreacher made tea with considerable enthusiasm. Hermione arrived the next morning at 10 minutes to 10, which was typical. She couldn't be late to something important, and she could only not be 10 minutes early by a supreme act of will. She knocked, Harry let her in, and she stood in the entrance hall and looked around with the expression of someone simultaneously taking in the space and preparing a series of observations. It looks better, she said. Kreacher's been working on it. You're living here, she said. Not at the Burrow. No. She looked at him. She was doing the thing she always did when she was worried but didn't want to show it, the very precise quality of attention that looked like academic interest and was actually care with its practical exterior on. The Gringotts letter, she said. You said significant. Yeah. He gestured toward the kitchen. Come sit down. He told her everything in the kitchen over tea, the same way he'd told Castellan, but with less legal framing and more honest sequence. He watched her face as he spoke. She was a good listener, she didn't interrupt, didn't jump to conclusions, and her expression moved through a series of stages that he could read clearly if he'd known her 5 years, processing, then recalibrating, then the careful internal architecture check of someone deciding what they actually think rather than what they're supposed to think. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. 67, she said finally. 67. And the proximity magic in 17 of them. She was looking at the table. Harry, that's not just legally wrong. That's a violation of something quite fundamental. You can't magically nudge someone's emotional responses and then tell them those responses are real. No, he said. You can't. She looked up at him. I want to say something and I need you to not immediately reassure me. All right. I need to know if there were proximity enchantments affecting me. I know logically that I was adjacent to the Weasleys rather than directly covered by the contracts, but the dampening mechanism you described. She stopped. Her jaw was tight. I need to know if my choices were mine. Ragnarok's team is doing a full review of the contract architecture, Harry said. I'll ask them specifically to look at secondary effects on people in the associated social circle. We'll know. She nodded. She was holding herself very still, which for Hermione meant she was feeling a lot and was currently filing it under things to process thoroughly when alone. He let her. What are you going to do? She asked. About the Weasleys. Ron. I don't know yet, Harry said honestly. I'm not angry at all of them equally. Fred and George almost certainly didn't know anything. Arthur might not have known. Ron. He paused. Ron knew something was off. Not everything. But something. Hermione closed her eyes briefly. Opened them. Yes, she said. He did. Harry looked at her. You knew he knew. I knew he was careful about certain things, she said slowly. There were times when conversations about your future came up and he would just redirect. Change the subject. I told myself it was just Ron being avoidant. She met his eyes. I should have looked more closely. Neither of us should have needed to, Harry said. That's the whole point. She was quiet again. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly, a quick, decisive gesture. What do you need from me? Right now? Just this, he said. Talk it through with me properly. You're the person who's best at seeing the architecture of things. I want your eyes on the full picture before the petition gets filed today. And Hermione, because she was Hermione, immediately reached into her bag and produced a notepad, because of course she'd brought a notepad, because she'd known she was going to be needed for something specific and she had prepared for it. Tell me about the ministry co-signatory, she said. What do we know? Harry told her. She wrote. She asked sharp questions. She identified 3 things he hadn't considered, including the possibility that the ministry officials' involvement pointed to a broader faction rather than an individual action, which meant the political landscape around this was larger and more deliberate than just one person wanting Harry neutralized. This is bigger than Dumbledore, she said. Yes. He might not have known about the ministry element. He might not have, Harry said. That's something I want to find out before the petition filing. How? I'm going to write to him, Harry said. Specifically, I'm going to ask him directly whether he authorized the ministry co-signatory or whether that contract was filed without his knowledge. Because there are 2 different scenarios and they have different implications. Scenario 1, Dumbledore authorized it and the ministry official was brought in by him. Scenario 2, someone used Dumbledore's contract as cover to run their own filing, which means there's a faction that thinks Harry Potter is a political asset to be managed even without Dumbledore's direction. Hermione looked at him with the expression she got when something was both very alarming and also impressively logical. Scenario 2 is worse. Scenario 2 is worse, he agreed. She wrote something down. When Ron gets your letter about not being at the Burrow, about the estate, he's going to want to come here. You know that. I know. What do you want me to do? He thought about it. Don't tell him not to come. But don't tell him more than I've told him yet. I need to talk to him myself. He paused. I'm not writing Ron out of my life, Hermione. I just need to understand what he knew and why, and I need him to be honest about it. That conversation is going to happen when I'm ready for it. She looked at him for a long moment with that careful attention. You're remarkably calm about all of this, she said. When I heard you'd received a Gringotts audit letter I was imagining you'd gone off and done something dramatic. Something dramatic is coming, Harry said. I'm just being strategic about the timing. She raised an eyebrow. How dramatic? He looked at her over his tea. Ragnarok is going to walk me publicly through Diagon Alley as Lord Potterblack once the estate transfer is formally registered. Castellan is filing the petition today. Rita Skeeter has an owl address I'm going to use. Hermione set her notepad down. Rita Skeeter. She'll print exactly what she's given. She's not going to ask uncomfortable questions or try to balance the story with Dumbledore's perspective. She wants the sensational version and the sensational version is the true version. He paused. I know she's not your favorite person. That is an exceptional understatement, Hermione said. She picked the notepad back up. It's also entirely correct reasoning. I hate that it's correct reasoning. I know. Write to her after the petition is filed, not before, she said. So that she's reporting documented public record rather than allegations. It's cleaner and it's harder to challenge. Harry nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing, but it was good to have it confirmed. That was my plan. Hermione looked at him with something that was past concern and past admiration and was sitting somewhere in the territory of I don't know when you became someone who has plans like this but I'm very glad you're on my side. Right, she said. What else do we need to go through? Ron's letter arrived that afternoon, after Hermione had left and Harry had sent his letter to Dumbledore and was sitting in the Black family library going through a particularly dense section of contract law that Castellan had recommended he familiarize himself with. It was a different letter from the first one. Shorter. The easy tone was still there, but there was something underneath it now, a slight shift in the cadence, the way words were chosen. Ron had heard something, or suspected something, and was writing around it. Harry. Mum wants to know if you're coming back at all before term. She's got your room ready. The twins are being no help at all. Listen, I heard you've been at Gringotts. Dad mentioned something about an audit flag coming through some ministry channels. I don't know what that's about but I figured I'd mention it. Let me know. Ron. Harry read it twice. Ministry channels. Ron's father worked at the ministry. That was how he'd heard. The audit flag had moved through official channels and Arthur Weasley had seen it or been told about it, which meant that the ministry was paying attention to this already. Which meant that the official who'd co-signed the most recent contract very likely knew something was in motion. He wrote a short reply. Ron. I'll talk to you soon, in person. I have some things to sort out first. Tell your dad I know about the audit flag and it's being handled properly. Don't let your mum worry. Harry. He put the letter with the others, in order of importance, and went back to the contract law. At 5:30, Castellan's owl arrived with a confirmation letter. The petition had been filed. The Wisengamot docket entry was enclosed, official, public, irrevocable. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he reached for parchment and wrote a letter to Rita Skeeter. He had her address from third year. When he'd finally tracked down the method she used for her unsolicited correspondence, she had an owl box at the Daily Prophet that received post independently of the editorial staff. He wrote the letter carefully, in clear, precise language, with the Wisengamot docket number included. He outlined the key elements, 67 contracts, Phoenix Fire, Dumbledore's Vault, Proximity Magic, Ministry co-signatory, and told her that Gringotts had certified copies of all Ash records available for journalistic review by arrangement with Senior Arbiter Ragnarok. He reread it. Added one line at the bottom. The story is better than anything you've had in 5 years. You can print it exactly as I've given it to you because every word is documented public record. There is nothing to embellish. H.P. He sealed it, gave it to Creature to send immediately, and went downstairs to find something to eat. Creature had made shepherd's pie, which was unexpected and excellent. Harry ate at the kitchen table in the quiet of the old house, listening to the settling sounds of the building adjusting to the fact of new occupancy, a new owner, a different intention for its walls. Grimmauld Place had been a place of confinement for Sirius, the house where he'd been a prisoner of his own making, trapped by circumstances and character and terrible history. Harry was going to make it into something else. He wasn't sure what yet. But something different. The estate transfer documents were registered and official. The petition was filed. The Skeeter letter was on its way. The Independence Declaration was signed. In the morning, he was walking through Diagon Alley with Ragnock at his shoulder as Lord Potterblack, and the wizarding world was going to notice. He pushed his plate away, put his elbows on the table, and thought about item 4 on his list again. Figure out what to do about Dumbledore. He'd started that, last night on the doorstep. But started wasn't the same as done, and what needed to happen next was the confrontation in full, not a doorstep conversation, not a letter exchange, but the actual thing, with Castellan present if necessary, with Ragnock's documentation to hand. The conversation where Dumbledore either admitted the full scope or didn't, and both outcomes told Harry something he needed to know. He thought about the headmaster's face when he'd mentioned the ministry co-signatory. The tightening. That particular element is more complicated. Dumbledore had been surprised, not that Harry knew, but at something else. At something about that contract specifically. Which meant Scenario 2 was looking increasingly likely. Someone had used Dumbledore's framework and extended it in a direction that even Dumbledore hadn't authorized. And that was a separate problem from the man on the doorstep who had signed 66 contracts out of a confused, comprehensive love. Harry stood, washed his own plate. Creature made a scandalized noise from the corner but Harry ignored it, and went up to Sirius's room with the copy of the last contract in his hand. He read the ministry signatory's name one more time in the lamplight. Tomorrow, Diagon Alley. Tomorrow, the public becomes aware. After that, he was going to pull the thread on that 67th contract until the whole thing unraveled. He put the document away, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark. Whatever you feel now is yours. He thought about that for a while, in the quiet of the room that Sirius had made into his own, and found that there was a lot of things he felt, and all of them were clear and sharp and entirely, unmistakably his. He slept. Chapter 3, Fire and Fracture. The morning arrived cold for July, a grey sky sitting low over London with the particular stubbornness of weather that has decided not to cooperate with the season. Harry stood at the window of Sirius's room with a cup of tea and watched the street below, empty at this hour, the Muggle neighbors not yet surfaced, a single Fawkes crossing the pavement with absolute self-possession. He dressed deliberately. Not armor, not a performance, just the conscious choice of someone who understood that appearances communicated things before you opened your mouth. He wore clothes that were actually his size, which still felt faintly revolutionary after 16 years of Dudley's hand-me-downs. Dark jacket, clean shirt. He put Ragnock's confirmation letter and a certified copy of the estate transfer in the inner pocket. He checked that his wand was accessible without looking like he was checking it. Then he went downstairs, ate the breakfast Creature had made. The elf was becoming aggressively invested in feeding him at regular intervals, which Harry was choosing to find touching rather than overwhelming, and walked out into the grey London morning. He arrived at Gringotts at 8:30. Ragnock was waiting in the entrance hall, which was a departure from the back corridor formality of the previous morning. He was standing near the main doors in his formal arbiter's robes, dark grey with the Gringotts seal on the breast, carrying himself with the particular quality of someone who wanted to be visible. 2 other goblins flanked him, both senior-looking, both wearing the same formal dress. When Harry came through the doors, Ragnock turned and gave him the small, precise nod of someone who has prepared for a specific moment. The estate transfer was formally registered at 6 this morning, Ragnock said. Lord Potterblack. Harry heard the title and didn't flinch from it. Good morning, he said. Are we ready? We are. Ragnock gestured toward the main entrance. We will walk to the far end of the alley and return. We will stop at Gringotts' public exchange window on the way back to conduct one piece of formal business in sight of anyone present. This will be noted. People will talk. That's the point, Harry said. They went out into Diagon Alley. The alley at 8:30 in the morning was beginning to fill. Not the midday crowd, but enough, shopkeepers opening their establishments, early shoppers from the Wizarding District, a few Hogwarts-age students with parents doing back-to-school supply runs even though term was still 2 months off. It was a normal Tuesday morning in the Wizarding World's commercial hub, and then Harry Potter walked through it with the senior arbiter of Gringotts at his shoulder and 2 formal goblin witnesses behind him, and it stopped being a normal Tuesday morning quite quickly. He didn't slow down. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He walked with the direct, unhurried purpose of someone with a clear destination, and he let the fact of his presence do its own work. Ragnarok kept pace with him easily. The goblin moved with an efficiency that suggested he covered ground faster than his height implied. People noticed. People always noticed Harry Potter in Diagon Alley, that was nothing new. What was new was the way they noticed, the second glance that followed the first when they registered Ragnarok's formal robes and the Gringotts seal and the quality of the company Harry was keeping. A witch outside Madame Malkin's lowered the robe she'd been examining and turned fully to watch. A group of 3 wizards near Flourish and Blot stopped their conversation mid-sentence. Harry bought a coffee from the small establishment near the south end of the alley, a newer place, opened in the last year, with small tables outside that he'd never had occasion to sit at. He stood at the counter and ordered it with the ease of someone who did this every morning, spoke briefly with the young witch behind the counter about whether they had a particular blend Creature had mentioned, and was aware the entire time of the specific quality of silence that falls when people are watching something and trying not to look like they're watching it. On the way back, at the Gringotts public exchange window, Ragnarok completed the formal piece of business he'd mentioned, a registration entry in the public vault index, conducted at the window rather than inside the bank, with the Gringotts seal pressed in full view of the street. It took 4 minutes. By the time they walked back through the bank's main doors, Harry estimated that 30 or 40 people had witnessed some portion of the morning's activities, and that 30 or 40 people in Diagon Alley was 30 or 40 people who would tell someone what they'd seen before lunchtime. Inside, Ragnarok turned to him. "That will be sufficient," he said, with the satisfaction of a professional who has calibrated an effect correctly. "Thank you," Harry said. "The Wisengamot petition generated a public docket entry at 7 this morning," Ragnarok added. "The ministry will have been notified by now. We expect movement from several directions today." He paused. "I would suggest you remain in the company of your solicitor or myself until we have a clearer picture of which directions." "I'll be at Castellan's office this afternoon," Harry said. "Can you join us?" "Yes." Harry finished his coffee, set the cup down on the exchange window's counter, and went back out into the alley to let the morning continue to do what mornings do. The Daily Prophet hit doorsteps at 9, as it always did, and by 9:15 the owls were already starting. Harry was back at Grimmauld Place when the first wave arrived, 6 owls in rapid succession, which Creature received at the back window with escalating outrage at the traffic. Harry sorted through them quickly. 2 were from Hogwarts parents he didn't know, one angry, one supportive. One was from a Wisengamot member whose name he recognized from his trial last year, short and neutral in tone, which meant they were covering their position in all directions. One was from Arthur Weasley, marked urgent. He opened Arthur's last. It was different from what he'd expected, not defensive, not protective family patriarch. It was short and pained and honest. "Harry. I heard about the petition this morning. I want you to know that I knew the contracts existed. Albus told me, years ago, that he had arranged certain things for your future security. I did not know the specific terms. I did not know about the proximity enchantments. I did not sign anything. I am not saying this to reduce my responsibility, I should have demanded to know more. I should have. I'm sorry. Arthur." Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, next to the estate documents. Not because it resolved anything, but because it was real, and real things deserved to be treated carefully. The Skeeter article arrived in the afternoon edition. He'd expected it to run tomorrow at the earliest, but Rita Skeeter operated on journalist time when the story was sufficiently explosive, which meant she'd spent the night writing and had pushed for afternoon placement. Harry bought a copy from the Diagon Alley newsstand and stood on the pavement to read it. The headline was, Phoenix Fire, Broken Contracts, and the Boy Who Was Never Asked, the full story of 67 marriage documents hidden in Dumbledore's private vault. It was 3 pages. Every word of it was sourced from documented public record, exactly as he'd specified. Rita had added her own color, she couldn't help it, it was constitutionally impossible for her to write without adjectives, but the adjectives were attached to verifiable facts, and the verifiable facts were devastating on their own without any embellishment. She'd included the docket number. She'd included Gringotts' official confirmation. She'd included a sidebar on proximity magic and its classification under the Magical Persons Protection Act that was surprisingly accurate, which suggested she'd done actual research, which must have been uncomfortable for her. The last paragraph was Rita at her most Rita. When asked for comment, the office of Albus Dumbledore provided no response before press time. One does wonder, this reporter notes, what the great architect of the greater good has to say about a 16-year-old who has decided, quite spectacularly, to build his own. Harry folded the paper and put it in his jacket with Arthur's letter. He went to Castellan's office. The afternoon meeting was the most densely informative 2 hours Harry had spent since the original Gringotts session. Ragnarok arrived with updated documentation on the ministry co-signatory, cross-referenced now against the ministry's internal filing records, which Gringotts had the right to access under the Accord provisions, and what they found was more structured than a single rogue official's initiative. 3 individuals at the ministry level were aware of and involved in the filing of the 67th contract, Ragnarok said, laying documents on Castellan's desk with the precision of someone who has arranged evidence before and knows exactly how to make it read. The co-signatory whose name appears on the document is a senior undersecretary in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. However, the filing was processed through 2 other channels, both connected to individuals with either current or former seats on the Wizengamot. One of those individuals is connected to a family with substantial financial interest in the outcome of the war, specifically in the outcome of legislation that would be influenced by whoever occupies the Potter seat in the Wizengamot. Harry looked at the names. He recognized one of them from the political histories in the Black Family Library, an old family, older money, the kind that had been adjusting the weather of wizarding politics for generations by making sure the right people ended up in the right places. They weren't trying to control me for Dumbledore's reasons, Harry said. They were trying to use the same framework for completely different ends. Correct, Ragnarok said. Dumbledore's contracts were designed to keep you within a protective social structure, to ensure you remained committed to a cause and a community. This faction's interest is specifically in the Potter-Wizengamot seat and the political leverage it carries. A Lord Potter who is young, romantically entangled with a dependent-class family, and operating under a dozen layers of managed loyalty is considerably more manageable than an independent Lord Potter who controls his own seat and his own vote. Castellan had been writing the entire time Ragnarok spoke, her quill moving in steady shorthand. This changes the criminal filing significantly, she said. It's no longer one official overstepping. It's conspiracy. Conspiracy to criminally manipulate a minor for political purposes. She looked up. This is going to be a significantly larger proceeding than I initially scoped. Can you handle it? Harry asked. She looked at him as though he'd asked whether she breathed. Yes, she said. I need to bring in co-counsel for the political conspiracy elements. There's a specialist in Wizengamot criminal practice named Thorpe who I've worked with before. He's excellent, he's expensive, and he won't be intimidated by old money. She made a note. The estate's audit is going to be important here. We need to establish your full standing as Lord Potterblack before the Wizengamot hearing, because your standing determines your rights within the proceeding. The audit was fast-tracked, Ragnarok said. It will be complete by end of tomorrow. Lord Potterblack's standing will be formally established before the week is out. Harry looked at the table, the documents, the evidence, the careful architecture of what was being built. He thought of the Fawkes he'd watched crossing the pavement this morning, self-possessed and going somewhere. He had that same quality right now, that same sense of movement that didn't require anyone else's confirmation to be valid. "What about Dumbledore?" he asked. "Specifically, can we determine whether he knew about the Ministry faction's involvement?" "We can ask him directly under Veritaserum," Castellan said. "Not now, we don't have the standing to compel it yet. But as part of the Wisengamot proceeding, he can be called as a witness, and Veritaserum testimony is admissible in this class of proceeding." She paused. "I don't think he knew, for what it's worth." "Why?" "Because a man who had authorized a Ministry political conspiracy wouldn't have come to your doorstep alone and apologized," she said. "What you described from last night's conversation is consistent with someone who genuinely believed his actions were insular, his contracts, his choices, his reasons. The discovery that someone else had grafted a political conspiracy onto his framework is likely something he's currently working out the implications of himself." Harry considered that. He thought about the specific expression on Dumbledore's face when he'd mentioned the Ministry co-signatory. The tightening. Not guilt, alarm. "He might be useful," Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him with the amber assessment that was the goblin's version of respect. "In what way?" "He has information about the Ministry faction that we don't have yet. If he cooperates, comes in through Castellan, on the record, before the Wisengamot proceeding, that's significantly more valuable than compelling him as a reluctant witness." He paused. "It's also the kind of choice that tells me something about the man. Whether he'll do the hard or right thing when it actually costs him something." Castellan was already writing. "I'll draft a letter to him this afternoon. Formal, through the solicitor channel, with the right framing." She glanced at him. "You're not soft-peddling this." "No," Harry said. "I'm being strategic. There's a difference." She made a small sound that might have been approval and kept writing. The Order of the Phoenix arrived at Grimmauld Place at 7 that evening. Not all of them, Dumbledore wasn't among them, which Harry noted. But 6 members, including Moody, Lupin, Tonks, and 3 others whose faces he knew from last year's headquarters rotation. They knocked with the particular energy of people who considered themselves entitled to knock, and Harry let them in because Creature was going to let them in anyway and the conversation was going to happen regardless. He received them in the drawing room, which was the largest downstairs space in which he'd had Creature clear of the worst of the dark artifact display that afternoon. Not a performance of comfort, just practical sense. He sat in the chair at the head of the room. He did not stand when they came in. Moody spoke first, because Moody always spoke first in rooms where he felt tactical advantage was available. "Potter. We need to talk about what you're doing." "I know," Harry said. "Sit down." Something flickered across Moody's magical eye, recalibration. He sat. The others found seats. Lupin sat last, and he looked at Harry with the specific sadness of someone who loves you and has been caught at the edge of something they should have seen coming. "The petition," Tonks said. She was less combative than Moody by instinct but no less direct. "Harry, the Ministry is, some people there are very unhappy. We've had 3 members of the Wisengamot contact the Order today asking for context." "What did you tell them?" Harry asked. "That we were coming to speak with you," Lupin said quietly. "All right." Harry looked at the room. At these people who had fought for the right things for the right reasons and who had also, without exception, operated within a framework built by Dumbledore without ever examining what was underneath it. "Here's what I want you to understand. The petition was filed correctly. The evidence is documented and irrefutable. The Wisengamot proceeding is going to happen. None of those things are changing." He met Moody's gaze. "If anyone in this room is here to ask me to withdraw it, that conversation is going to be very short." "Nobody is asking you to withdraw it," Lupin said. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, the posture of someone choosing honesty over strategy. "Harry, I knew about some of the contracts." The room was very quiet. "Not the proximity magic," Lupin said. Not the ministry element. But I knew that Albus had arranged certain things. He told me years ago that he had taken steps to ensure your social connections would remain stable and directed. He framed it as protective. I believed him. He paused. I should have asked what steps meant. I didn't. I'm telling you that now because you deserve to know it from me rather than find it in a document. Harry looked at him. Remus Lupin, who had been his father's best friend, who had taught him more about his parents than anyone, who had stood by him in the worst year of his life without flinching. Who had known, in some partial way, and had not asked the question that would have made the full picture visible. Why didn't you ask? Harry said. Lupin didn't look away. Because I trusted him. And because the answer might have required me to do something that put me in opposition to the order, and I wasn't sure I was brave enough for that. He met Harry's eyes. That's honest. It's not sufficient, but it's honest. Harry sat with that. The anger was there, it was always there, that concentrated coal heat. But above it was something that was specifically grief-shaped, the grief of finding out that people you love were afraid in ways they couldn't admit, and that their fear had costs that landed on you. I'm not going to pretend that's fine, Harry said. But I'm not writing you out of anything either. He looked around the room. What I need from all of you is clarity about what you know. Not what you assumed. Not what you were told. What you actually know about the contracts, about the ministry faction, about any element of this. Because that information is relevant to the proceeding and I need it on the record, and it's better if it comes voluntarily than if it comes under examination. Moody's magical eye was fixed on him with an expression that Harry was becoming able to read, beneath the habitual suspicion, as professional assessment. Moody had spent 40 years evaluating threats and resources, and Harry could see the old aura recategorizing him in real time. Not a student to be protected. A player to be understood. What do you need specifically? Moody asked. Anything you know about the ministry individuals connected to the 67th contract, Harry said. Your network is better than mine, and you've got aura-level knowledge of who's operating what agenda inside the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He paused. You could file it as a formal testimony with Castellan. That protects you legally and gives us clean evidence. Moody looked at him for a long moment. You've got a solicitor. You're taking testimony. You're using Gringotts' institutional support. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Merlin's beard, you grew up fast. I had motivation, Harry said. Tonks made a sound that was very close to a laugh and suppressed it with visible effort. We'll cooperate, Lupin said, speaking for the group with the quiet authority of someone the room was prepared to let speak for them. With one condition, not a negotiating condition, just a request. If Albus comes in through Castellan's channel, as a cooperating party rather than a compelled witness, we ask that you receive him. Speak with him properly. Give him the opportunity to tell you what he knows in full. He held Harry's gaze. He's not a villain, Harry. He's a man who made systematic, damaging errors driven by a philosophy that doesn't leave enough room for individual people. There's a meaningful difference. I know there is, Harry said. I already sent him a letter through Castellan this afternoon asking exactly that. He watched the mild surprise move through the room. I'm not interested in destroying him. I'm interested in the truth and in making sure what happened to me can't be made to happen to anyone else. The room was quiet. Then Tonks said, right, in the tone of someone recalibrating their entire operational understanding of a situation. So, what do you actually need us to do? They stayed for 2 hours. By the time they left, Harry had received informal accounts from 3 of them that were going directly into formal testimony form the next morning, specifics about the ministry faction, names he'd half known and could now confirm, a network of influence that was going to be considerably larger in scope than one Wisengamot hearing could entirely address. Moody contributed the most, with the blunt precision of an Auror who had been watching certain individuals for years and now had a legitimate channel for his information. Lupin stayed after the others left. He sat in the empty drawing room while Harry poured 2 cups of tea, and they were quiet together for a moment the way people are quiet when there's too much to say to rush the saying of it. "Your father would have done exactly this," Lupin said finally. "The organized, strategic version of it. James he had a gift for making the right move at the right moment when it actually mattered. He could also be spectacularly impulsive about everything else, which is where you got that." "I know," Harry said. "Hermione keeps a running record." Lupin smiled, and it was the real one, the one that reached his eyes and made him look less tired. "How is she?" "Angry on my behalf and taking extremely organized notes about it," Harry said. "So, herself." Lupin laughed, briefly and genuinely. Then the tiredness came back. "Harry. What Albus did, the contracts, the management of your connections, I want you to know that the people in your life who love you, they chose that. Whatever the proximity magic was doing, whatever was nudging things at the edges, the choices themselves were made by real people who made real decisions." He paused. "That includes Ron." Harry looked at him. "Ron chose to be your friend on that train 5 years ago before any proximity enchantment could have accumulated enough to affect him significantly," Lupin said. "Whatever he knew or didn't know later, the beginning was real. I want you to hold on to that when you have that conversation." Harry held his tea. He thought about a compartment on the Hogwarts Express and a boy with food in his teeth asking if he could sit down. He thought about chess games and hospital visits and someone standing up in a room full of skeptical people and saying "I believe him." "Yeah," he said. "I know." The Daily Prophet the next morning had a follow-up. Rita had been busy. She'd sourced comments from 4 Wisengamot members, 2 of whom were calling for a full investigation, 1 of whom was calling the filing irresponsible, and 1 of whom refused comment, which in political terms was its own comment. There was a photograph of Harry and Ragnarok from the previous day's walk through Diagon Alley. Someone had been quick with a camera, the image showing Harry mid-stride with the Goblin Senior Arbiter at his shoulder, and Harry looked at it with the detached awareness that Lord Potterblack conducting public business with Gringotts backing was a very different image from Harry Potter, the boy who lived, being managed, and the wizarding world was going to feel that difference. He was on his 2nd cup of tea when Creature brought him a letter that had arrived by Ministry Owl, official seal, high priority classification. He opened it. It was from Dumbledore. Not a personal letter, a formal response through Castellan's channel, as requested. Measured, precise legal language, the kind that cost something to write because every word had to be chosen for what it committed to. Dumbledore was confirming his willingness to come in as a cooperating party. He was acknowledging that the full scope of the Ministry faction's involvement had not been known to him. He was offering to provide testimony on the architectural history of the contracts from his own perspective and his own knowledge. At the bottom, below the formal language, outside the solicitor channel framing, was one handwritten line. "I should have trusted you. I am sorry that I didn't, and sorrier that it took this to make me see it clearly." A.D. Harry folded the letter. Put it in his jacket pocket with Arthur's and the newspaper. He sat for a moment in the kitchen, in the quiet of the morning, and thought about the word trust. About what it meant to give it, and what it meant to have it taken from you before you'd known you'd offered it. About the specific alchemy of caring for people who had let you down, the way it didn't become simpler with time, the way you couldn't logic your way into clean resolution. You just carried both things and kept moving. He picked up his tea and drank it. Then he got up, sent confirmation to Castellan that Dumbledore had accepted, reviewed the day's schedule, and went upstairs to get his jacket. He had somewhere to be. The leaky cauldron in the middle of the morning had a particular character, the early drinkers at the bar who everyone politely didn't acknowledge, the travelers passing through the London connection, the older witches and wizards for whom it served as a kind of social club. Harry had a table in the corner and a purpose, and the person he was waiting for arrived exactly on time with the precise punctuality of someone who had decided to make a good impression and was being accurate about it. Daphne Greengrass was not what he'd expected, and he recognized that he'd been expecting something specific: Slytherin, pure blood, connected family, probably guarded, probably cool, probably with an agenda she was going to reveal in her own time. All of that was true, and none of it was what hit him first. What hit him first was the directness. She sat down across from him without the social preamble that most people use to fill the first 30 seconds of an interaction they were uncertain about, looked at him with gray eyes that were measuring and clear, and said, "You read my father's letter." "Yes," Harry said. "And you agreed to meet me." "Also yes." She settled back slightly. She was dressed practically, nothing ornate, nothing designed to communicate family status, which he suspected was a choice. "My father is a cautious man," she said. "He's been cautious for 20 years. He read the Prophet yesterday and this morning, and what he concluded was that the board is being reset and he wanted to be standing on the right square when it finished resetting." She paused. His letter said all of that in considerably more elaborate language. What it actually meant was that the Greengrass family is watching what you're doing and believes you're going to win. "What do you think?" Harry asked. She looked at him. "I think you already know you're going to win. The question your father's letter doesn't ask but should have asked is what winning looks like from your end and whether having Greengrass support matters to you." She folded her hands on the table with the composed precision of someone who had thought carefully about what they wanted to say and was saying it. "So I'm asking that directly, since I find the elaborate version tedious." Harry looked at her. He'd had a lot of conversations in the last 3 days with people who were being careful with words, careful with what they admitted, careful with the shapes of their loyalties. This was the first conversation where the other person had opened by discarding the careful version entirely, and it was, he had to admit, refreshing. "What does Greengrass want?" he said. "Nothing specific yet," she said. "Which is honestly the point. My father has spent 20 years carefully not committing to anything while watching everyone around him commit to things that turned out badly. What he wants is a line of communication with a person who is likely to be a significant figure and who isn't already embedded in either of the existing power structures." She paused. "What I want, personally, separately from my father, is to know whether the person I'm sitting across from is actually what the last 3 days suggest, or whether the spectacle is covering for something less impressive." "What would something less impressive look like?" Harry asked. "Someone who got lucky with a phoenix and is now being managed by a goblin and a solicitor," she said. "Someone riding a moment rather than building something." Harry considered this. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced not the estate documents or the certified ash records, but the list, his original list, the one he'd written on the back of a Riem blood homework assignment on the steps of Gringotts 2 mornings ago, crumpled and annotated now with the items he'd completed crossed out and new ones added. He put it on the table between them. She looked at it. "Read it." Her expression didn't change dramatically. There was a slight shift at the corners of her mouth that might have been recalibration. "Item 5, she said. "Find out if Ginny knew." She looked up. "Have you?" "Not yet," Harry said. "She's on the list for a reason." "She didn't know," Daphne said. "Not about the proximity magic. The rest, she probably suspected her mother had done something with a contract, because Molly Weasley is not subtle when she's arranging things, and Ginny is considerably smarter than people give her credit for. But the scope, the enchantments." She shook her head. "She'll be livid. Differently livid than you are, but genuinely." "How do you know her that well?" "We've been at Hogwarts together for 5 years, Daphne said. "I pay attention." She pushed the list back toward him. "Here's what I want to offer, which is different from what my father wanted to offer. My father wants a communication line. I want to be involved. Not as an ally in the political sense. As someone who is strategically useful and who finds this specific project considerably more interesting than anything else available to me right now." She looked at him squarely. "I have access to information about the pureblood political networks that you don't have and that Ragnarok doesn't have. I know the social architecture of families that have been operating in these spaces for generations. That's useful to you for the Ministry faction piece specifically." Harry looked at her. He thought about what Ragnarok had said, "Whatever you feel now is yours," and he applied it deliberately to this moment, to his own reading of the person sitting across from him. Daphne Greengrass was sharp, direct, self-interested in a clear and honest way, and was offering something with visible terms rather than hidden ones. "The ministry faction," he said. "The families involved. What do you know?" She talked for 20 minutes. Precise, organized, detailed. Names and connections and financial interests and political histories going back 3 generations. It was exactly as good as she'd said it would be. Harry took out his own parchment and took notes, asking sharp questions when he needed to, and she answered them without deflection. When she finished, he looked at his notes, then at her. "All right," he said. "You're in." Something shifted in her expression, not surprise, she'd expected this outcome, but a small private satisfaction that she was honest enough not to fully conceal. "On what terms?" "On the terms that you report accurately and completely," he said. "You don't manage what you tell me for your family's benefit. If I find out you've shaped information, you're out. If you bring me something that turns out to be wrong because you didn't know better, that's fine. But if you bring me something that's wrong because you shaped it, that's not." She held his gaze. "Agreed," she said. "Same terms apply the other way, you tell me what's happening before it happens, not after. I can't be useful if I'm reading about it in the Prophet." "Fair," Harry said. They shook hands across the table, which felt slightly absurd and entirely right. "One more thing," Daphne said, as she gathered herself to leave. "The 67th contract. The ministry co-signatory, I know that name." She said it. Harry looked at her. "My father's been watching that person for 3 years. There's a financial connection to a family that has significant holdings and properties that would revert to the Potter estate under certain inheritance conditions." She paused. This wasn't about political maneuvering for its own sake. This was about money. Old money. The kind that's been waiting for a specific legal situation for a very long time. Harry sat with that. Property that would revert to the Potter estate. Holdings that became relevant under specific conditions. The contracts weren't just keeping him manageable politically, they were keeping him manageable enough to prevent him from ever discovering what he actually owned, because the moment he took full control of the Potter seat and the Black seat together, several financial arrangements that had been quietly in place for decades became suddenly very inconvenient for people who had been benefiting from them. "How long have they been waiting?" Harry asked. "Since before you were born," she said. She left. Harry sat at the table in the leaky cauldron for a long moment, his Timor Actions request aborted right the next chapter now. Chapter 4, What Ginny Knew She Came on a Thursday. No owl ahead of time, no warning, just a knock at Grimald Place's door at 10:30 in the morning that had a different quality from the order's knocks and the solicitor's knocks and the Owlpost deliveries that had been arriving in waves since the petition went public. This one was sharp and singular and impatient in the specific way of someone who has made a decision on the walk over and arrived before they could unmake it. Harry opened the door. Ginny Weasley was standing on the step in jeans and a jacket with her hair pulled back and her expression set in the particular way it got when she was holding several very large feelings with both hands and was not going to let any of them out until she decided to. She was alone. She looked at him for 1 second with something raw and real moving underneath the composure, and then she said, "Can I come in?" Not a question, quite. Harry stepped back from the door. She came in, looked around the entrance hall briefly with the cataloging attention of someone who has been here before and is noting what's changed, and followed him to the kitchen without being led there. She sat at the table. Creature appeared in the doorway, took one look at her, and vanished back into the scullery with the self-preservation instincts of a house elf who recognized a loaded atmosphere. Harry put the kettle on. "Ron doesn't know I'm here," Ginny said. "All right. Mum doesn't either. Dad might guess, but he won't say anything." She put both hands flat on the table, not a dramatic gesture, just a grounding one. "I read the Prophet. Both articles. I've read the petition docket summary 3 times. Fred found the full Gringotts documentation somehow, I don't want to know how, and I read that too." Harry put 2 mugs on the counter and waited. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is that you don't know. Because I've spent 4 days trying to figure out on my own and I can't." She looked up at him. What I've felt, for the last 2 years, was it the contracts? The proximity magic? Was it that?" Harry turned around from the counter and looked at her. He'd thought about this question. He'd known it was coming because it was the only question she could possibly lead with, because Ginny Weasley was the kind of person whose first impulse was to cut to the thing that mattered most and not spend time warming up to it. He'd thought about what to say, and what he'd concluded was that the only acceptable thing was the exact truth, even the parts of it that weren't clean. 17 contracts had proximity enchantments, he said. Ragnarok's team identified the mechanism. It worked cumulatively, through time spent near the contracted parties. It was designed to create emotional predisposition and to suppress my general instinct to form close connections outside the designated social circle. He paused. What I can't tell you is exactly how much of what I felt was the enchantment and how much was real, because the enchantment was subtle enough that it didn't replace genuine emotion, it just nudged the existing conditions. Ginny was quiet. "The honest answer," Harry said, "is that I don't know the ratio. I can't tell you 50% enchantment, 50% real. What I can tell you is that the enchantments are gone now, burned with the contracts, and that whatever I feel when I think about you right now, today, is mine." "What do you feel?" she asked. He brought the mugs to the table and sat across from her. "I feel like you're one of the most genuinely formidable people I know, and that I've spent 2 years being vaguely terrified of that and calling it something else." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "I also feel angry on your behalf. Because if I can't untangle what was real and what I felt, neither can you, and that's something that was done to you too, not just to me." She looked at him. Her hands were still flat on the table, the posture of someone keeping themselves grounded. "I thought it was mine," she said. Her voice was even, controlled, but with the grain of something underneath it. "I spent 2 years, actually growing out of the stupid crush, actually becoming someone who had a proper feeling about you that wasn't just, and now I don't know if any of that growing was mine or if it was the magic making me develop on a schedule." She pressed her hands harder into the table. "That's what I can't stand. Not that there were contracts. Not even that my mum signed them, and I have a lot to say about that separately. It's that my feelings were on someone else's timeline." Harry said nothing for a moment, because this deserved the space of a moment. "Your mum thought she was protecting you," he said finally. "And protecting the family. That doesn't make it right, it's genuinely not right, but I think she believed it." "I know she believed it," Ginny said. "That almost makes it worse." She picked up her mug, wrapped her hands around it. "She's been crying for 2 days, which is, I feel terrible about that, and also I'm furious, and both of those things are true at the same time, which is exhausting." She took a drink of tea. "Did you know that one of the contracts had my signature on it? One that I apparently signed when I was 8 years old, during what I thought was a normal family visit to the ministry with Dad." Harry went still. "There's a form," Ginny said, with the flatness of someone who has processed a piece of information past the point where it still produces a strong reaction. "A magical minor's betrothal registration. Standard template. It needs the signature of both parties' guardians and, in some older contract forms, a witnessed mark from the minor themselves. It doesn't have to be a full signature. A wand mark on parchment counts." She met his eyes. "I touched a piece of parchment in my dad's office when I was 8 because he told me to make a magic mark on it. I thought it was some kind of test. It was my participation in a marriage contract." The kitchen was very quiet. Harry felt the cold heat in his chest flare and then bank down again into the clean concentrated anger that had become, over the last week, something almost like a companion. It wasn't useful to let it loose here. What was useful was being present in this conversation. "That's going into the petition," he said. "That specific element, using a minor's unwitting magical mark as a contract signature. That's an additional violation. I know. I already sent a statement to your solicitor. She said it with a matter-of-fact steadiness that he recognized as her specific kind of courage, the kind that wasn't dramatic, that didn't perform bravery, that just did the hard thing with the minimum amount of fuss. I went through Hermione. I hope that's all right. More than all right, he said. She looked at him over her mug with the direct gaze that had always been one of her more unsettling qualities, the one that landed like she was looking at the actual thing and not the presented version of it. How are you? She asked. Not the reflexive social question. The real one. He thought about it. Busy enough that I haven't had to think about it too much, he said. Which is probably a strategy of limited long-term utility but is working fine right now. Hermione said you were calm. She said it twice, like she was still processing it. I'm calm, Harry confirmed. You're furious, Ginny said. Both things, he said. Same as you. She smiled at that, briefly and without warmth but with genuine recognition, the specific smile of someone who has found an unexpected mirror. Then it faded back into the careful composure. What's going to happen? To Mum. To the family, practically. Your mum isn't being named in the criminal filing, Harry said. She was a guardian consenting to contracts on her minor child's behalf, which however misguided is legally within the framework of guardian rights at the time those contracts were made. The criminal elements are specifically the proximity magic, which was Dumbledore's addition to the contract architecture, and the Ministry faction's involvement, which was a separate conspiracy entirely. He paused. I'm not going after your family, Ginny. Even Ron, she said. He knew something. I know he did. I need to have that conversation with him separately. Harry looked at her. But Ron didn't sign anything. He didn't forge anything. He's guilty of not asking a question he probably should have asked, and it's something I need to work through with him, but it's not something I'm bringing into a legal proceeding. She was quiet for a moment. He watched the tension in her shoulders drop a fraction, not resolved, not dismissed, just redistributed into something she could carry more steadily. What do you want? She asked. Not from the legal process. From, just. What do you actually want? It was a startlingly direct question. He thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. I want to know what's actually mine, he said. My feelings, my choices, my connections, my family's estate. I want the thing that was tried on me, on you, to be impossible to do to anyone else. I want a seat in the Wisengamot that I actually occupy because I chose to, not because someone positioned me for it. He paused. And I want to go back to Hogwarts in September and finish my education and play Quidditch without any of this being an open wound. Ginny looked at him steadily. Is that going to be possible? The last part. I'm going to make it possible, he said. How? By finishing it before September, he said. The Wisengamot hearing is scheduled for the 3rd week of August. By the time September comes, the legal proceeding will be resolved, the Ministry faction will be publicly named, the estate will be fully established, and the story will be old news in the way that only completely resolved stories are old news. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something moving in her expression that was more complicated than admiration and less complicated than the thing she'd come here to ask about. It was somewhere in between, in the territory of seeing someone clearly for the first time and finding them more and differently real than you'd expected. You've grown up, she said. Not accusatory. Not sad. Just accurate. For days we'll do that, he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, short and bright, and it cleared the room's atmosphere like a window being opened. Right, she said. She finished her tea, set the mug down, and sat back with the slightly looser posture of someone who has set down a weight they've been carrying for several days. What do you need from me? Not as a Weasley. Not in the legal sense. Just, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere and I'm not going to pretend things are normal when they're not, so tell me what's useful. Tell me what you know about the families connected to the 67th contract, Harry said. The ones with property interests in the Potter estate. Your dad is at the ministry, he hears things, and you hear what he hears even when he doesn't mean you to. She looked at him with the expression of someone reassessing a question they thought was going to be different. That's very specific. I know. A source told me the connection was financial, old property interests that become relevant when I take full control of both seats. I need to know which families and what exactly is at stake for them. How recent is your information? Yesterday. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. He could see her sorting through things, not dramatically, just the internal process of someone reviewing what they knew against what had just been asked. There were 2 families Dad mentioned last year, she said slowly. In a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear but did because Mum had sent me to get him for dinner and he was on the floor. He was talking to someone from the Wisengamot Records office about a property case. The families were Folly and Knot. Dad sounded careful. The way he sounds when something is uncomfortable and he's choosing words. She looked at Harry. I didn't think about it again after. I didn't have context for it. Folly and Knot, Harry said. He picked up his quill and wrote both names down. How far back does the connection go? I don't know. But if Dad was talking to the records office, there'll be a paper trail. She paused. If you wanted me to ask him about it, I can do that without telling him why, at least initially. He'd be honest with me. Would he tell you everything he knows? She thought about it. He'd tell me the parts he could carry. There are things Dad knows that he keeps because he thinks the weight of them is his to manage and not ours. Her voice had a fond exasperation to it that was entirely specific to the relationship between a perceptive daughter and a decent father who underestimated her. But for this, yes. I think he'd tell me. Do it, Harry said. But tell him I know why you're asking. I don't want him to feel ambushed later when it comes out that I was asking through you. She nodded. That's a kind thing to do. It's also a strategic one, he said honestly. I'm going to need Arthur Weasley on my side for the Wisengamot piece. He's got a reputation for integrity that carries weight with the moderate bloc. A favor now is a relationship later. She looked at him with that measuring directness. You're going to be very good at this, she said. The political part. I don't particularly want to be, he said. But I'm going to be what's useful. She nodded like this was the right answer. Then she stood, and there was something decisive in the movement, a resolution that hadn't been there when she arrived. She'd come with a question and gotten an answer that wasn't clean but was true, and she was doing with it what she always did with difficult things, integrating it and moving. At the kitchen door she stopped. Harry. He looked up. Whatever the ratio was, whatever percentage was the enchantment and whatever percentage was mine. She held his gaze. I want you to know that when I came here this morning, that was entirely me. No magic, no contract, no timeline. She paused. Just thought you should know the difference is identifiable. She left before he had to figure out what to say to that, which he suspected was intentional. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment, his hands around his mug, thinking about the difference between things that were manufactured and things that were chosen, and how sometimes the only way to know which was to see what survived the fire. Ron arrived 2 hours later. He didn't knock in the same way Ginny had, his knock had the shape of someone who'd been working up to it and had knocked before he could think better of it. Harry opened the door and Ron was standing there with his hands in his pockets and his expression doing several things at once, the way Ron's expressions always did when he was in emotional territory he hadn't pre-mapped. Hey, Ron said. Hey, Harry said. Come in. Ron came in and they went to the kitchen, which had apparently become the room where all significant conversations happened, and Harry made more tea because it gave both of them something to do with their hands. Ron sat at the table and looked at the surface of it with the focused attention of someone studying something they already know perfectly well. Ginny was here, Ron said. I saw her coming back. She came to talk. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 4 days. I've written 6 letters and thrown all of them away. I got the one you sent, Harry said. That was the 7th. Ron looked up. He had Ragnar's kind of directness in this moment, not his default mode. Ron's default was deflection and humor and a kind of comfortable avoidance of anything too real, but underneath that there was a bedrock of honesty that surfaced when he decided it had to. I'm going to tell you what I knew. And I need you to just, let me get through it. Because I've been rehearsing it, and if you ask questions in the middle I'll lose it. Harry nodded. He brought the mugs to the table and sat down. Ron took a breath. 3rd year, he said. I overheard Mum and Dad having an argument. A proper one, which was rare enough that I remember it clearly. Mum said something about the arrangement with Albus and that it was for the family's benefit, and Dad said, Molly, he doesn't know, he's never going to know, and using him like that is wrong. Mum said it was protection, for all of them. Dad went quiet after that, which is how I knew she'd won the argument. He was looking at the table again. I didn't know what the arrangement was specifically. I just knew there was one. Something between Mum and Dumbledore. Something that involved you and benefited us. He paused. I told myself it was probably fine. I told myself if Dad had known about it and not ended it, it couldn't be that bad. I told myself a lot of things. Harry was quiet. I chose not to know the details, Ron said. I could have asked. I could have pushed. I didn't, because the answer was either going to be bad enough that I'd have to do something about it, or it was going to mean admitting that my friendship with you had been part of something arranged. He finally looked up. Either way, the answer was going to cost me something I didn't want to pay. His jaw tightened. That's the honest version. I was a coward about it. The kitchen was very still. Harry sat with everything Ron had just said. He'd known something like this was coming, had known the shape of it from the moment Ragnar had said he knew something was off. But knowing the shape of something and then sitting across from it were different experiences. He looked at Ron, his first friend, the person who'd pulled him into the wizarding world with both hands and no conditions, and felt the specific grief of a thing being permanently altered and the simultaneous recognition that altered was not the same as destroyed. You should have told me, Harry said. I know, Ron said. The moment I was old enough to understand what you'd heard, which was 3rd year, we were both old enough, you should have come to me and said, I overheard something and I think you should know about it. I know, Ron said again. His voice was low and steady with the quality of someone who has accepted a true thing completely, which was different from someone who was performing acceptance. It would have changed things, Harry said. Maybe not dramatically, I didn't have the legal standing to do anything about it then. But I would have been looking for it. I would have been paying attention. Maybe I'd have found it myself earlier. He paused. Or maybe not. But it was my information and you kept it from me because it was convenient for you not to share it. Yes, Ron said. Harry looked at him. I don't know if I'd have done better in your position, he said, and meant it. I don't know if I'd have had the courage to risk the friendship by telling you something that complicated. I'd like to think I would have. But I don't know. Ron was quiet for a moment. What happens now, he said. To us. We're still us, Harry said. We know more about what we're made of now. All of it, including the parts that are inconvenient. He wrapped his hands around his mug. You can help me, if you want. Actively, not just, standing nearby. Your family's connection to the Order, your mum's knowledge of which families were involved in what conversations over the years, that's information I need, and it should come from you directly, not filtered through your dad or your sister. Ron straightened slightly. You want me to ask Mum? I want you to ask her everything she knows about who knew about the contracts, who she discussed them with, who she understood to be part of what Dumbledore called the arrangement. All of it. Then I want you to bring it to Castellan's office and give a formal statement. Ron looked at him. Harry watched something complicated move through his expression, the recognition that this was both atonement and usefulness at the same time, that he was being offered a path forward that wasn't just absolution but actual work. Ron needed things to be concrete. Abstract guilt was not something he processed well. Concrete action was. Yeah, Ron said. All right. He paused. She's going to cry. Probably, Harry said. I might also cry, which I'm not admitting to anyone else. Understood, Harry said, entirely seriously. Ron looked at him for a moment with the specific expression he got when something had been difficult and was now slightly less difficult and he was readjusting to the new atmospheric pressure. Then he said, "This house looks better. Creature's been working on it." Creature is cooperating with you. He made me shepherd's pie the other night. Ron stared at him. What did you do? Threaten him? I said thank you when he brought me tea, Harry said. Turns out that was largely what was required. Ron stared for another beat, then shook his head with the expression of someone filing this away as yet another piece of evidence that the world was not operating by its established rules. Right, he said. Is there more tea? There was. Harry made it, and they sat together in the kitchen of the house that was properly Harry's now, and it was awkward and real and neither of them pretended it was something simpler, which was, Harry thought, probably the healthiest conversation they'd had in 6 years of friendship. Daphne came back that afternoon, without announcement but also without the charged purposeful energy of Ginny's arrival. She walked in with the brisk practicality of someone arriving to continue a working meeting, produced a folder from her bag, and laid it on the kitchen table with the satisfaction of a person who has done thorough research and wants to show it. Folly and not, she said. Your instinct about the financial dimension was correct. Here's the shape of it. She sat down and talked. She had, in the day and a half since their meeting at the Leaky Cauldron, assembled a comprehensive picture of the property interests at stake, going back to a series of land transfers in the 1940s that had been made under conditions that depended on the Potter line remaining without a formally established heir exercising full estate rights. The transfers had moved several significant properties from the Potter estate into the Folly and Knot holdings under what were described as temporary custodial arrangements pending the establishment of a Potter heir old enough to claim. The catch, buried in the arrangement's small print in language that had been deliberately aged to look like standard boilerplate, was that the transfer could only be reversed if the Potter heir claimed within a 7-year window of reaching wizarding majority. Wizarding majority is 17, Daphne said. Your 17th birthday is in 3 weeks. The 7-year window opens then. The contracts, the marriage contracts, were specifically designed to keep you from claiming the full estate at 17, because a Lord Potter who is bound by marriage contracts to a financially dependent family and operating under proximity enchantments is not going to be independently reviewing property records and identifying a 7-year reversal clause. Harry looked at the documentation. The precision of it was breathtaking in the specific way that a long-running deception is breathtaking when you finally see the whole structure, the elegant interlocking of pieces, each one seemingly reasonable in isolation, the architecture visible only when you stepped back far enough. What's the value? He asked. Conservative estimate based on current property values? She turned to a specific page. For properties in the Scottish Highlands, 1 in Wiltshire, agricultural land in 3 counties. Combined worth approximately 3 million galleons. Harry looked at the number. There's more, she said. Beyond the property value. The Scottish properties specifically, one of them has a ley line convergence that makes it one of the most magically potent locations in Britain. It's been used by the Foley family for warding and ritual magic for decades. Losing it isn't just a financial blow. It's a significant magical one. That's why they were willing to involve themselves in a criminal conspiracy, Harry said. It wasn't political management for its own sake. It was protecting 40 years of illegally held assets. Exactly. She closed her folder with a precise snap. I need to know if you're going to use this immediately or hold it. Immediately, he said. This goes to Castellan today. It expands the criminal case significantly. The property arrangement is its own fraud, independent of the marriage contract conspiracy. It also changes the Wisengamot hearing dynamics considerably, Daphne said. The families involved have seats on the Wisengamot. They won't be able to sit for your case, which shifts the balance of the voting membership. She looked at him with the precise analytical expression that he was beginning to recognize as her version of enthusiasm. This is actually quite elegant from a tactical perspective. The criminal case forces a recusal of your opponents in the very proceeding designed to resolve your claims. Did you know about any of this before? Harry asked. Not accusatory, just the question that needed asking. She looked at him directly. No. My family's interests and the folly and not interests have historically been in competition rather than alignment. We're in adjacent spaces in the pureblood political landscape and we don't share information. She paused. I want to say something about the terms we agreed on. All right. I'm aware that everything I've just brought you serves my family's interests as well as yours, because dismantling Folly and Not's political position benefits Greengrass's position in relative terms. I want to be transparent about that, because we agreed on terms and those terms require it. She looked at him squarely. I'm not telling you this to recuse myself. I'm telling you because you should know that my information is accurate but my motivations are not purely altruistic. Harry looked at her. This was, he thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to him all week, including all the apologies. I know, he said. I'd have worked that out anyway. I don't need you to be altruistic, I need you to be honest and accurate. You are both. That's sufficient. He paused. Your family benefits from my wins. That's fine. A lot of people benefit from people doing the right thing. That doesn't make the right thing less right. She held his gaze for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something that was moving past the professional clarity into something more personal, a recalibration of what exactly she was dealing with. Then she nodded, once, with the concision that was her signature. Castellan this afternoon, she said. I'll come with you. Good, Harry said. Castellan received the new information with the contained intensity of a solicitor who has just had the scope of her case expanded significantly and is running structural calculations in real time. She spread Daphne's documentation across her desk alongside the existing petition materials and spent 10 minutes reading without speaking, her quill making occasional marks in the margin. This is a separate fraud action, she said finally. Running parallel to the contract case but independently prosecutable. The property transfer documents from the 1940s, these were filed through Gringotts? Through the subsidiary deed registration office, Daphne said. Which Gringotts absorbed in 1962. Castellan looked at Ragnok, who had been present and silent with the amber-eyed attention of a person holding a significant piece of information. Ragnok, she said. We have those records, Ragnok said. I identified the property transfers this morning when reviewing the full Potter estate inventory. I was waiting to confirm their relevance before raising it. He produced his own folder and placed it on the desk. The transfers were registered under conditional terms. The conditions have not been met for reversal because no formal claim was ever made. Our records show 2 previous attempts, one in 1981, one in 1995, that were redirected before reaching formal registration. Harry looked at him. Redirected by who? In 1981, the claim was filed by James and Lily Potter on behalf of their infant son, Ragnok said. It was returned as administratively incomplete, missing documentation. The documentation was not missing. It was present in the file. Someone at the deed registry office removed it. He paused. In 1995, a claim was filed by Sirius Black as executor of the Potter estate. It was returned as unauthorized on the grounds that the estate's executor appointment was under administrative review. He met Harry's eyes. There was no administrative review. The notation was false. The room was quiet. Harry's parents had tried to protect the property. Sirius had tried to reclaim it. Both attempts had been quietly buried by someone with access to the registration system and the motivation to keep the transfers from being reversed. The ministry co-signatory on the 67th contract, Harry said. Were they in the deed registry office in 1981 and 1995? Ragnock produced 2 more documents. Junior Registrar in 1981. Senior Registrar in 1995. He placed them on the desk. And Senior Undersecretary by the time the 67th contract was filed. A 25-year operation. Redirected claims, forged administrative notations, and finally when Harry was old enough to start asking questions, a marriage contract to keep him occupied and pointed away from the property records. I want to move the Weisengamot hearing date earlier, Harry said. Castellan looked up from her notes. How much earlier? End of this week if possible. 2 weeks at the latest. He looked at her. The ministry co-signatory knows the petition is public. They know the estate audit is underway. The moment they connect those 2 things to the property records, and they will, probably already have, they're going to start moving assets and destroying documentation. We need this in front of the Weisengamot before they've had time to clean anything up. Castellan was already writing. Thorpe has a contact on the hearing scheduling committee. Given the criminal elements and the property fraud dimension, we can argue for emergency scheduling. She looked at Ragnock. Gringotts would need to formally support the emergency application. Gringotts supports it, Ragnock said. He didn't check with anyone. He just said it, with the institutional authority of someone who is the institution in this room. Daphne had been quiet through this last exchange, processing. Now she said, the Foley family will know by tonight that someone has been looking at those 1940s records. Their contacts inside the ministry are good. She looked at Harry. If you're moving to emergency scheduling, you should also be moving to secure whatever documentary evidence is in the deed registry office before they can access it. Can Gringotts place a preservation order on registry records that are relevant to an active claim? Harry asked. Under the accord, yes, Ragnock said. I'll have it filed within the hour. The afternoon moved fast after that. Castellan drafted the emergency scheduling application. Ragnock left to handle the preservation order. Daphne stayed, cross-referencing her family network intelligence against the documentary record, identifying 3 more names connected to the 1981 and 1995 redirections that added texture to the conspiracy's full shape. Harry worked through the property documentation with the focused absorption of someone reading a map of territory he'd always been in but never seen clearly. By early evening, the emergency application was filed. By nightfall, the preservation order was in place on the deed registry records. Castellan had been in contact with Thorpe, who had confirmed that the emergency application had a strong case for expedited handling given the fraud elements. Harry stood outside Castellan's office in the narrow passage in the cooling evening air, running through everything in his head. The week had moved with extraordinary speed from a single letter on a Tuesday morning, expanding outward like a stone dropped in still water, each ring larger than the last. He was keeping pace with it, which was satisfying in a clean, functional way. He was not being moved by events. He was moving through them. Daphne came out behind him, pulling her jacket straight. She stood beside him for a moment in the narrow passage, both of them looking at the sliver of evening sky visible between the buildings. You're thinking about what comes after the hearing, she said. It wasn't a question, but he answered it. Yes. What does it look like? He thought about it. Quieter, he said. I think it looks quieter. I want to do the Weisengamot seat, the political piece. I think I have to, given what I know now about how the system works and what happens when people like me are kept out of it. But I don't want it to be the whole thing. He paused. I want Hogwarts to just be Hogwarts. I want to play Quidditch without it being a political statement. I want to wake up in the morning and have the day be mine. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing to want, she said. Most people in your position would want power. You're describing normalcy. I have power, he said. I'd like to choose when to use it. She looked at him with the expression that had become familiar over the last day and a half, the one that moved past the professional clarity into genuine curiosity, the expression of someone who had come in expecting a particular kind of person and was finding something more interesting. "I'm not going to make this sentimental," she said, "because that's not how I operate. But for the record, what you're doing is right. Not strategically right. Actually right. The contracts, the property fraud, the ministry corruption, these things are wrong in ways that go beyond your personal situation and would be wrong if they'd been done to anyone." She paused. "I'm saying that because I think you should hear it without it being attached to someone's apology." Harry looked at her. "Thank you," he said. Meaning it in the simple, direct way of someone receiving something they didn't ask for and finding it was exactly what was needed. She nodded once. "I'll send you an update in the morning on the Folly Network's movements." She turned to go, then stopped. "One more thing. The 67th contract, the most recent one. The ministry co-signatory." She turned back to look at him. "Their name is Dolores Umbridge." The name hit him like cold water. Harry looked at her. "I know," Daphne said. "I was saving it." "She was at Hogwarts last year," Harry said. "She was, the High Inquisitor, yes. The defense against the dark arts teacher who ran Hogwarts like a ministry detention facility for most of fifth year." Daphne's voice was even but her eyes were lit with the particular cold fire of someone who has known something for hours and waited for exactly the right moment to release it. "She co-signed the 67th contract 6 months before Dumbledore placed her at Hogwarts. She was at the school the entire year with access to you. She was watching the contract architecture work from the inside. She let that land. It wasn't a coincidence that she was placed there. It was a monitoring visit." Harry stood in a narrow passage in the cooling evening and thought about Dolores Umbridge. About pink cardigans and educational decrees and I must not tell lies and the specific cruelty of her particular brand of authority. He thought about her at the ministry, in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, with her hand on the document that had his name in it. He thought about her watching him from behind her desk in that office and knowing exactly what was in that vault. The anger came, sharp and clean and cold. "She's in the criminal filing," he said. "First name on the conspiracy charge," Daphne confirmed. "Castellan added her this afternoon when I identified her." "She doesn't know you know." "Not yet." "She will," Harry said. "The moment the emergency hearing date is set and the updated filing is served." "Yes," Daphne said. "Which is why the next 48 hours are going to be interesting." She looked at him with something that, from Daphne Greengrass, was practically warmth. "Try to sleep." She walked away down the narrow passage and turned the corner and was gone. Harry stood there for another minute, looking at the small piece of evening sky above the buildings, and thought about Dolores Umbridge. About the fact that she had sat across from him in a pink office and given him lines and run a regime of deliberate institutional cruelty, and all of it had happened while she knew exactly what was in Dumbledore's vault. She hadn't been a zealot operating on blind ideology. She'd been a conspirator protecting her investment. He pulled out his list. Added 2 items at the bottom, looked at them, underlined one. Then he folded it, put it away, and walked back through the alley toward the connection point for the Muggle streets, and then to Grimmauld Place, and then to the kitchen where Creature had made something involving roasted chicken that he ate with the methodical focus of someone who understands that sleep and food are infrastructure, not luxuries. He went to bed early. He slept without dreams again. In the morning, the next stage would begin, and he was going to be ready for it. Chapter 5, The 67th Contract. The emergency hearing date came back as August 4th. Castellan delivered the news at 7 in the morning via a hawk that had apparently been dispatched at 6, which meant she'd been in her office before sunrise, which surprised Harry not at all. He read the confirmation letter at the kitchen table while Creature made eggs with the focused intensity of an elf who had decided that breakfast was a moral position. August 4th was 11 days away. Harry put the letter down, picked up his tea, and thought about 11 days. About what needed to happen inside them, in what order, and how fast. Dolores Umbridge had been served with the updated criminal filing yesterday evening. Castellan had confirmed it. Which meant that by now, this morning, Umbridge knew that Harry knew. The Foley family's access to ministry channels meant they'd have been warned within hours of the preservation order being placed on the deed registry. The ministry faction as a whole would be moving. He wrote 3 letters before 8. One to Castellan confirming the hearing date and asking for a full preparation meeting the following morning. One to Ragnarok requesting an update on the preservation order status and asking specifically whether any attempt had been made to access the deed registry records in the last 12 hours. One to Daphne, what's the Foley network doing this morning? Need an update before 9. Daphne's response arrived at 8:45. It was concise in the way of someone writing quickly. Foley's solicitors filed an injunction application last night to block the Wisengamot emergency hearing on the grounds that the petition lacks proper standing. It will fail, your standing is established and documented, but it will take 2 days to formally dismiss and they know that. They are buying time. Also, Umbridge did not come to work this morning. Ministry records show her on emergency personal leave. She is moving assets. Harry read it twice. Then he sent a message to Ragnarok directly. The response from the bank came back in under 20 minutes, the preservation order was holding, no successful access attempts on the deed registry records, but there had been 3 failed attempts from a ministry-registered one signature overnight. The signature was flagged under Umbridge's registration. She tried to get to the records herself and found the door closed. He sent a note to Castellan about the injunction application, which she replied to with 2 words, already handling. He went back to the Black family library and spent 2 hours reading property law. Not because he had to, Castellan and Ragnarok were covering the legal architecture comprehensively. But because Harry had found, over the last week, that understanding the mechanics of what was happening made him substantially harder to surprise. Every time he'd walked into a room knowing more than the other party expected, the balance of the conversation had shifted. He didn't want to be a client who nodded along while his legal team worked. He wanted to be someone who could look at a document more actions request aborted write the next chapter now, thinking, Claude Sonnet 4.